Our residents, family, friends, and neighbors here in El Paso are provided electric service from the same electric company that all of our friends, family, and neighbors in Las Cruces do. And of course, all the places in between, from again, as I noted, from Hatch all the way to Van Horn. Is one thing that is a key deal for our company is that we have a major presence and a long-time presence in the company. We've been a private company here in El Paso for over 100 years with 1,100 employees who spend a lot of their time in the community, with community hours and volunteers, and sitting on boards and being active in the community. And so one of the things that is really great about this agreement that we have with IIF is much of that is going to stay. And why do I say that? Is because historically, when these issues happen, when a local electric company or a regional electric company receives a knock on the door, and that was the case with us, many times the person who's on the other side of the door is an entity that is not necessarily good for the community. The headquarters, jobs, all of those charitable contributions and the volunteer hours and the time that people spend being a part of the community disappears. And that's not the case here. With the Infrastructure Investments Fund, after going through the process that we needed to go through, as required by all of the regulations of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and all of our obligations as required by federal and state law, we ended up with a partner that is not just good for El Paso Electric Company, but it is good for the community as well. The jobs stay in El Paso. The headquarters stays in El Paso. The charitable contributions and the time that our employees spend volunteering, serving on boards, and being part of this region stays. And so as we move forward and as we're going through this process, I want everyone to understand, because obviously, I'll note, and everybody can agree, when this happens, it's something that doesn't happen in the history of a 120-year-old company very often. And wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to explain to you, and in coordination with the leadership of the city of El Paso, which played an active role in evaluating the agreement and saying, you know, this needs to be better. That the parties said, if we're going to be a part of this community, we're going to make it better. We're going to address the concerns of the city of El Paso, which is an active participant in the Public Utility Commission of Texas in Austin, and joined us in the settlement agreement with all the other parties that participate, including our union, and all of our 400 plus union strong members of the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers, Local 960. To have that then come to agreement and everybody realize that IIF and the Infrastructure Investments Fund puts us in a good position when many of our fellow communities that have gone through these types of agreements have not been in a similar position. So as I'm going to introduce Dan Notaro to you, he's a representative from Infrastructure Investments Fund. He's here to give you a little bit of an explanation about who they are. But one of the things that I want to make sure that you understand is, as we went through this process, why El Paso Electric Company chose them. As we noted, you know, there's obligations and requirements that people have to do in order to make sure that they fulfill their state and federal obligations. But in this process, you find a great partner. Working with them over the course of the last year, and especially over the course of the last few months and getting to know this team, this is somebody that we can trust at El Paso Electric, and it's somebody that I hope that as we introduce them to you, that El Paso learns to trust, and Las Cruces learns to trust, and our community learns to trust. Because this is an organization that, again, as I noted, has committed to maintaining a headquarters in El Paso, jobs in El Paso, and charitable contributions at our current levels. And again, as I know, that's not the same story that many people get to tell in other communities. So Dan, I'd like to introduce you to our crowd here. Sit down.
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to learn a little bit more about the transaction here. My name is Dan Notaro. I'm an executive director at JP Morgan Investment Management. I'm joined by a number of colleagues here today, including Lanny Gilbert, who will be there to answer questions in the Q&A session, and all of us will be around afterwards to answer any questions that you have as well. So I want to reframe this slide a little bit about why EP chose IIF and why IIF is so fortunate to have EP make that decision, because I think we're really excited about this partnership. As Adrian noted, the electric company serves a really dynamic, fast-growing region. We think there's tremendous opportunity here. We've been extremely impressed spending the last couple of months getting to know both the employees and the community at large. This is a really passionate, dedicated employee base and folks who really care about their community. El Paso is a strong, vibrant area. We should, I think, really blown away by the welcoming nature of the employee base and the support we've received. So when we think about why IIF is so enthusiastic about this opportunity, It's not just the people we've met, but it's also what the future looks like, which includes investments in renewable energy and other technological changes that are coming to the utility industry where we feel like we can be a great partner to help El Paso Electric going forward. So moving ahead in the slides here, I'll talk a little bit about who IIF is and how we do business and what we do from a day-to-day perspective. So IIF is a long-term infrastructure investment fund. It has a buy and hold orientation. IIF is owned by 500 different pension plans and other insurance companies, endowments, and foundations. Folks who really represent 40 million different families, individuals that look a lot like the people in this room, have their collective retirement savings that are invested in IIF and depend on IIF for their retirement security and for income to support their retirement funds. So when we think about what the IIF portfolio looks like, it's 19 different companies, and that's really companies that are strong and stable and look a lot like El Paso Electric Company. They operate in renewable energy, in transportation, utilities, just like EPE. So a portfolio that looks very similar to the type of business that El Paso Electric does. Now, what is the relationship with JP Morgan? I'm a JP Morgan employee, and my full-time job is dedicated to supporting the investors and the 40 million families that depend on the results that IIF delivers. And so IIF is owned by these investors and by these pension funds. And as JP Morgan's the investment advisor. The investors hired JP Morgan to be the advisor for this fund to oversee the portfolio. And our hope is to provide steady, stable income to those investors. Moving to the next slide, we'll just give you a little bit more detail around who these investors are. It's a combination of government pension plans, union plans, corporate plans, insurance companies, and the like. So these are all large institutions and folks that trust us from a day-to-day basis to deliver results to them for their retirement. On the next slide, I think just want to talk a little bit about the portfolio companies generally. As I mentioned, there are 19 of them. We're really fortunate tonight to have the chairman of Synetics, the solar power producer, Carlos Guinan, who will get up and talk a little bit more about what it means to be an IIF portfolio company and what that relationship looks like and how we partner with the companies that we invest in. But as I said, it's utilities, it's renewables and energy companies, and then transportation companies, all within this portfolio. And what's really exciting about it is these companies talk and they provide expertise and best practices, and they share great ideas, and they try to make each other better. And that's what we really think is the value proposition here. It's giving the El Paso Electric Company the resource to pick up the phone and talk to someone like Carlos and talk about what's going on in the solar industry and how do we bring more renewable expertise to the area. So we'll get into more detail there, but on the next slide, just want to talk a little bit more about our commitment to sustainability. Our investors, those 40 million families, they really care about things like environmental, social, and governance issues. We do everything from participating in third-party reviews of our performance around those areas. This past year, IIF was ranked number 2 out of 107 different funds in our performance in ESG. And then Synetics, for example, ranked number 1 in their group, and we'll talk a little bit about how they approach these type of issues. The other thing that we support are initiatives such as the 2041 initiative, which is a group that brings awareness to climate change. And actually recently we sent a CEO of one of our portfolio companies just this week made it to the South Pole, planted the flag of their company to bring awareness around how the climate is changing and what we can do to make an impact around that, because it's such a critical issue and it's something we hear from our investors all the time and something we want to raise awareness around. And when we got support for renewable energy, I think this slide shows how we have investments all across the United States in wind and solar and across the globe. I'd say a third of our fund is invested purely in companies that operate in renewable energy and invest in projects and build new projects around the world. So we think it's a really exciting platform. We have a lot of expertise that specifically speak to renewables, and we think it's a great opportunity to help partner and bring some of that expertise to the community. So with that, I would like to introduce Carlos Guinan to talk a little bit more about what it means to be a part of the IIF family. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity of being with you tonight. And I'm Carlos Guinan. I'm the chair and founder of Synetics Solar. I'm here to share tonight a little bit of my experience and perspective, our journey partnering with IIF, and to share with you a little bit of the Synetics story. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm originally from Venezuela. I'm a big passion about climate change. As you can imagine, coming from Venezuela, I grew up around the energy industry, and has been something extremely rooted in myself. The energy revolution, and with that background, the energy revolution, I think it's certainly going to happen. There's no doubt about it. It's a little bit how it's going to happen. That is the real question. I think it will happen basically with the inspiration, with the innovation, ingenuity, and investment. Those are the key elements. And with that in mind, in 2009, I started a company called Sonetics. We started with 1 megawatt, which was basically 2 acres solar farm in Spain. Also with 1 rooftop in France, which was at the time the biggest solar plant in northeast France. It was only 1 megawatt. To give you some perspective, 2009, we did this in the middle of Copenhagen. If you remember, was one of the biggest fiascos in climate change policy. At the time, was extremely frustrating. Solar at the time only had, to give you some perspective, 30 gigawatts of installed capacity in the world. Today we have around 600. And with that in mind, long story short, we went in 2010 to 2014 from 2 megawatts basically to 101, 119 megawatts. At that point in time, we said, and the primary focus of our team is really impact. So at that point in time, we decided, okay, how we take the company to the next level? What we need to do to make this happen and create that impact and go beyond what we have created. So at that point in time, we started looking for partners. Similar process to what you're doing today. For you, it was a big player of your community, which is a utility company. For me, it was my dream. For me, it was how this company that we were building, and it was very promising, how can we take it to the next level? And what we're looking at that point in time from our partner were 3 things. The first one was the capital to make the investment happen and to move on. Really for that, in that point in time, it was really important for us in the case of IIF that not only the capital, but who's behind the capital, and having the pension funds. Really what we were doing is we're working for the people, doing solar, socially speaking, but doing it with money from the people. It was a full circle. The second element for us was our identity, and having the opportunity to do it with a partner that allows to keep the independence and pursue the dream the way we look at it, it was really, really important. The third element we were looking, and is very important, it was a big differentiation, is long-term. With IIF, there are funds and there are funds. There's hedge funds and private equity funds, and there, in the case of IIF, is an infrastructure fund. Basically, the type of companies they are funding this is the bedrock of society. Okay, it's companies that are really to serve the primary needs of our living. So we started with a partnership that it was a joint venture in 2014, 50-50. It turned out to a complete acquisition back in 2016. And since then, the company has grown basically from 100 megawatts to 880 megawatts last year. This year we will close with around 1,450 megawatts. Our team grew from 50 people to around almost 300 people today, if you go to the next slide. And basically, Sonetics today went from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatts, and 5 years later, with the partnership with IIF, IIF has invested over $1.5 billion behind Sonetics. We're present in 8 countries. We're in Spain. We're one of the top 2 players in Spain. We're one of the 5 biggest players in France, one of the 5 biggest players in Italy. We're probably going to be the biggest foreign player in Japan. After the Fukushima meltdown, we went to Japan and had a big presence there. We're also present in South Africa. We're building right now a plant in Chile, which is the size of 173 football fields in the middle of the Atacama Desert. We are also in the US. We went to Puerto Rico, which was also a great experience for us. We're the biggest solar player in Puerto Rico. It's a place where we wanted to do it because it's a poor area. Engineering is complex because it's a very challenging grid, being an island. And the third most important point in Puerto Rico, we were displacing oil generation. So, long story short, Sonerix now, like I said, 955 megawatts today, going to 1,450 just this year. We're planting 2.5 million panels in these various jurisdictions, and by the end of next year, we probably will be around 1.8 gigawatts, 1,800. Our part here is to share with you a little bit of what has been our journey, what has been partnering with IIF, and also looking forward to engage with this community and of course with Paso Electric, share some of our knowledge and look for that collaboration and increase the impact. Thank you.
So a couple of things that I wanted to make sure we were clear is that we, as El Paso Electric Company, are regulated by a lot of government agencies. The Public Utility Commission of Texas, the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, the City of El Paso, all of our other incorporated municipalities in Texas, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. All of that still stays after the agreement with Infrastructure Investment Fund is completed. We're still going to be regulated by all of those agencies and all of the current agencies that regulate us. If this were another type of agreement, this agreement would already be completed. As I noted, we have to get approvals from all of the agencies that normally regulate us on a regular basis. We've already got approval from our shareholders, the Federal Communications Commission. Again, even though we're an electric company, we have the FCC that has to provide consent. They've provided consent. The Federal Trade Commission provided consent early on in this process. The we're still awaiting Nuclear Regulatory Commission approval, FERC approval. New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, I'm happy to report that we filed a unanimous settlement agreement with all the parties that were involved in New Mexico to find that this was in the public interest. The Public Utility Commission of Texas, and again, as I noted, that it now needs to move to the confirmed approvals. As I noted earlier today, the PUCT found that the agreement was in the public interest and approved it. And of course, lastly, the City of El Paso. The City of El Paso has consent over the franchise, and we have been working with the city and its involvement at the PUCT and here at the City of El Paso to make sure that this agreement is in the public interest. What's really great that we don't have, and I don't have the opportunity to do right now, is to pick up the phone and get expertise from somebody like Carlos. With the Infrastructure Investments Fund, we have now a portfolio and a family of companies where if there's a question that we have, and we are El Paso Electric Company, is a large company for our region, but in the United States, it's actually a relatively small company. So we're limited in the skills that we have and the resources we have, but we've got a great team. And now we've got the ability to pick up the phone and talk to people like Carlos, talk to people like Dan, and say, we've got this issue involving safety, and we want to learn a little more. Is there somebody that's kind of in one of your portfolio companies that's had this similar issue? And they'll be able to at least get us in touch to figure out if this is something that maybe works for us. And that's a telephone call that we don't necessarily or can't necessarily take today as the single El Paso Electric Company. So I'd like to turn it back to Norma as we can answer questions, and I hope that we get through as many of them as possible.
Okay, thank you so much. And again, our team in the back has been collecting questions from the audience, and they're going to bring them to me right now. Let me repeat the process again. You were giving a 3x5 card. The cards will be given to me so that I can go ahead and sort them out in different topics, and I can go ahead and post them to our representatives. I'm going to ask Landy and Adrian to take a seat. I believe Carlos as well. And I think Carla from the city is also here to answer any questions that you may have about them. Yes, go ahead. Thank you. So we're going to begin with this question. El Paso gaining from the sale of El Paso Electric? And I know, Carlos, you're getting settled in, but this question is for you.
As an El Pasoan, it's important to keep that in mind, and that's something that we gained as a community that we didn't have before. And they could have moved to headquarters before they sold Paso Electric to IIF, so that's something that we hadn't secured before. Thank you. You have any questions?
Since you're out already, so when will the city of El Paso go to the franchise agreement?
So we have finalized the negotiations of the franchise agreement. The franchise will be on the council agenda for introduction this next Tuesday, which is January 21st, and we expect a vote by council on February 4th.
Okay.
And we invite the public to come.
Okay. Instead of letting El Paso Electric be acquired by JP Morgan, why can't the city buy the company and run it like a municipally run utility?
Okay, so that's a very important question. I'm glad you are asking it. Council has asked during the course of these discussions with El Paso Electric that the city begin the process of talking about what it would take to purchase the utility. We call it permit the city of El Paso from just outright purchasing the utility. We can't throw it to the power of eminent domain. We would have to put a price on it and purchase it. Obviously, El Paso Electric was on the market and they paid, IIF paid $4.3 million. It would require a substantial increase in our property taxes to acquire a property and afford it. However, we have, with the direction of council, the city manager and I will be engaging in a process of determining what the feasibility study looks like, so that in the future that opportunity arises, the city can take advantage of it. I will tell you that the franchise agreement as negotiated now contains language that would permit the city to provide an option, have an option to purchase in the future via chooses to sell. The city would have the right to provide an offer within the first 120 days, and then if our offer is not accepted, then we would be willing to compete for the purchase in the future. So that is now in the franchise agreement, but it wasn't there before.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to ask Landy a couple of questions. So, one is IIF's relationship to JP Morgan. Are they your employer? And is IIF just a shell company for JP Morgan?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Glad to be here with you again. Excited to have the opportunity to the previous question, Dr. Mendoza, you asked why did the city not consider municipalization instead of selling to JP Morgan? And I want to clear that up, and then I'll get into the answer to the question. Again, JP Morgan is not buying anything here. This is the Infrastructure Investments Fund. As we've discussed in the presentation, owned by the investors, 512 pension funds that represent the 40 million families that have made this investment decision. So I'm employed by JP Morgan, but I work for the investors. And I want to be very clear. JP Morgan, that is responsible, that has the investment advisor relationship, is solely dedicated to those investors. We do nothing else within JP Morgan. And is responsible for
Let them speak! 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 Let them speak!
Yes, your question in the question. Let me just clarify something here. Let me clarify something. I have all your questions here, and this is making it so that we spend less time answering questions because you are disrupting the session. In order to answer the most number of questions representative of all points of view, I need you all to allow questions. As the question I was about to ask, if you allow me to continue, I was about to ask that question. How is it possible to be employed by JP Morgan but not work for JP Morgan? I am asking them. No, this is the rules of engagement, and we are going to continue to ask the question as you submit them. If you will allow to continue. If you allow me to continue, the question she just asked, I was about to read. So that gives you an idea of how you are hijacking the process, which is not just for you five, it's for the entire citizenship. We are going to answer your questions in the written format. Please go on.
You're not censoring the question.
We are not censoring anything. I am answering it. I am going to refrain. Let me just take a breather. Let me explain to you why this process was implemented. Throughout the country, we have seen the complete decline in civil discourse. We've seen city council meeting after city council meeting being interrupted and applying these kinds of tactics to prevent people from speaking. And so I was asked to facilitate this meeting, and I proposed this format because this has been adopted throughout the country to make sure that these kinds of things don't happen. Why? Because we want to hear as many different points of view from as many different citizens. Now,
No cards on a point of view. There's no chance for follow-up questions.
we want to hear the questions and concerns that you have. I am not filtering anything. I'm reading them here. Is this your handwriting? I'll go ahead and read them.
Can I help you read the questions?
No, but you don't need to help me. I'm a professional. I've been doing this for 10 years.
Where do you get your paycheck from? If you're an employee.
So here we go. The question that you were asking that began this, and I was about to ask, is how is it possible to be employed by JP Morgan but not work for JP Morgan? He wanted to ask the question, I was about to ask it. So Landy, now if you would do us a favor of continuing to answer.
Sure. As I said before, JP Morgan was retained by these investors as the investment advisors. That relationship is why JP Morgan is involved in this, but it is a dedicated group whose sole purpose is the investment advisor for this fund. So again, to make the point clear, it is not JP Morgan that is buying this utility, it is the investors in the infrastructure investment fund.
Do you get paid?
Here's another question that was submitted tonight.
We have made an investment in this plan that the company El Paso Electric has put forth. They have filings that they have made relative to what they're going to be doing. Can you hear me now? Okay, so the company has its business plan that is going forward. The way that the investors are going to get their return is the company performs. What the company is doing is it's providing safe, reliable, affordable electric service. It will continue to do that with IIF as the investor. There is prevention as far as rates. Nothing can be done without a potency review by the Public Utility of Texas. Nothing is going to change in the oversight from their standpoint. Nothing changes in the oversight that the Commission in New Mexico has, nor does anything change with the oversight that the City of El Paso has. So this is a business plan that the company has put forward, that IIF is investing in, and it will recoup its investment similar to the way that the public investors do now.
Okay, and just for the interest of transparency, 2 more questions that have the exact same question being asked. What is IIF's relationship to JP Morgan? Are they your employer? It was already asked. Another one, our investment and managing, is it not your job to advise the IIF to make as much profit from EPE? Exactly, all the profit from it? Isn't that what investment managers do? Yeah. As an investment fund manager, isn't it your job to advise IIF to make as much profits from EPE?
By extracting all the profits from it, is that not what investment fund managers do? So I think that there are some distinctions that need to be made, first and foremost, and I think Carlos referred to this when he was talking about it.
It's a yes or no question.
No.
If I could answer the question, please. So I think the reference of companies extracting all the profits, I think you're referring to hedge funds or private equity funds that strip costs, strip cash, and then look for exits and leave the companies behind. As we've said before, the Infrastructure Investments Fund is different. So as a fund manager, to answer your question directly, no, that is not what we do.
What do you?
Okay, so what happens is the investments are made, again, with a long-term point of view. We are making an investment not only in the electric company, but also an investment in the community. As the company grows and as more opportunity exists, that will benefit the community and the investors will benefit as well. So what happens here is there are a number of requirements that we have made.
Excuse me. Security, you had one warning. You had a warning. You had a warning.
We were not elected by the people of El Paso. We're not elected officials.
Please.
Why do you get to dictate how this format is done? We didn't elect you. You work for a corporation.
I don't work for a corporation. I'm self-employed.
That's right. That's your
I
company.
care for my company and I created this format to allow every point of view to be represented. If you notice that we have a small group of very vocal people and there are other citizens here who want to listen and who are here to and you're taking up their time. You're taking up their time. So please.
When a community with a history of lying, criminality, and cheating comes to light to our community, what do? Stand up, fight back! When these people come here and lie on their federal application that JP Morgan is an affiliate, what do? Stand up, fight back! No lies! JP out! Don't sell out! 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 JP out!
Okay.
We're passionate about this this year. We appreciate that there's passion in the room. I'm a native El Paso. I grew up. I'm part of this community. And I appreciate the fact that there's many of you in this room who want to listen, and want to hear, and I also appreciate that ideas as well. Because I know that I'm here and I am staying here after this meeting. Very rarely have you ever seen an interim or permanent CEO of the El Paso Electric Company say that they're going to sit in the room after the program and all the questions and answers are done and say that I'm going to sit here and I'm going to talk with everybody and I will answer your questions. We can afford the opportunity for us to sit and listen. Hey, everybody had the chance to write down that question and answer. And if your question is not, I am here after this meeting to be able to speak with everybody one-on-one.
On Tuesday, you also had the opportunity, many of you, all the members of IIF, El Paso Electric leadership was available for you to ask questions. They will remain again today. possible. Look at all the questions that I have. Now we wasted about half an hour listening to
our
all
time
of
with
you.
that solar company.
But all of the questions are not just from you. There's other citizens involved in having their voices heard. And we cannot have a small group of people hijack the process while other citizens. But yes, but right now there's other citizens, not just you, who want to go ahead and hear from the leadership. So, okay, I'm going to pick additional questions just because there's just so many. So, here's for Adrian. Do you believe in climate change?
As a CEO of an electric company, I will tell you that I do believe in climate change. It is an existential threat to our existence on this planet. And I am proud to say that I am part of a growing number of chief executive officers of electric companies who are recognizing that and doing what we can, also with making sure that we're mindful about the fact that we've got customers, laws, and statutes and regulations having to balance all of these needs and all of these resources that we have in order to make sure that we can add more renewables to our system, which I am proud to say that we are doing at this moment. Is it enough? No. And I think that this is something that you'll hear from many chief executive officers, many electric companies, and many funds around the country. They will tell you that it's not enough. But what we are doing is we are doing what we can. As I noted, I'm more than happy to speak with.
You're trying to add a natural gas plant.
And the reason why we are doing that is because we are trying to figure out the best way to add renewables onto our system and to balance it with natural gas with the additional resources of renewables and battery storage that we have.
Why are you building a $160 million
Okay, the next question. The El Paso community needs a strong commitment from IIF for an ASAP transition to renewable energy, especially to solar, which is in abundance here in El Paso. Can EPE do that? Is it past time for studies?
One of the great things that we have, and this is one of the things that we worked on with the city of El Paso, is a renewable study that we are going to be able to do. Focus on El Paso. It's one thing to say that you're the Sun City and that we're the Sun City. We need to know how to integrate all of that onto our system, appropriate, cost-effective, safe, reliable manner. The issue with being able to bring it onto a system is that we also need to make sure that the system lights on. We just can't have intermittent resources like solar onto the system without understanding the technical aspects of it. And this is something that city leadership has asked us to do as part of our green line. And this so that we can balance and that when we integrate solar resource onto our system, that we do it in a cost-effective manner, be mindful of the social status of our region and our customers.
Okay, and I have 3 questions that are all around the same topic. It says, will IIF and other satellite companies affiliated with IIF commit to not allowing EPE use for any fracking sites?
We don't do fracking. Land and the infrastructure investments.
You will be, please, this gentleman is disrupting the process. Come here.
As I noted, Public Utility Commission of Texas, and that is not something that we can do, nor is it something that we.
Similar question, how will the JP Morgan buyout affect the climate crisis and does it guarantee a transition to clean energy? I believe you just answered that.
And we have a resource here of also Carlos Ganan. I can pick up the phone in a way that I couldn't, and I can't at this particular point in time.
Again, very similar question. Why is IIF's unique plan for renewable energy separate from EPE's plan for renewable energy?
One of the things that's great about this is that there's an ability to get additional resources and leverage knowledge that we don't necessarily have at this point in time. Right now, when our great team thinks about what we can do for the system and how we are integrating more renewables onto the system, there's obviously technological limitations that we have. So the question is, when you end up with having a big part of a family of companies like Carlos Ganan's with Synetics, if we end up with a technical issue, our folks can now pick up the telephone and have somebody on the other end of the line that says, I'm encountering this particular technical issue and this technical limitation. Have you experienced something similar? And so that's one of the things that we're now able to have that we don't have at this particular point in time.
And these two questions are the same. Why hasn't EP Electric committed to being 100% fossil fuel by 2030? And can you please explain to the community what your plan is exactly to take us to renewables by 2030?
So the Public Utility Commission of Texas, and again, this is the one construct that we operate in, is the entity that dictates a lot of what we can and cannot do. So the Public Utility Commission of Texas, the state legislature, explains our requirements for providing electric service, and we have to do it in a safe and reliable manner. Part of that is making sure is how we integrate new renewables onto our system, and there is unfortunately, some limitations on what we can do technologically. It's not just the same as saying that we can put renewables onto the system at one moment, and then all of a sudden we have safe, reliable electric service. We need to integrate it over time. And so that's something that we're working for. The issue is the cost effectiveness.
Okay, so these, again, three questions that have the same thing. Which definite commitments are you making to renewables? Since you claim to be investing in renewable energy in El Paso, what specifically is your plan to move away from fossil fuels and energy sources?
As I noted, one of the things that we're doing is we are adding additional renewables onto our system at a utility scale. We have 150 megawatts of solar. We have 50 megawatts of standalone battery, which is something that's very new for our system. So these are things that we're doing to integrate onto our system right now. We also have some additional requests for proposals that we've recently awarded bids to for more solar facilities. So these are things that we are currently integrating onto our system. And again, as I noted, we're balancing the system that we have with the one that people are expecting in the future. And that does take some time. It also takes us time to interact with and work with our legislators in Santa Fe, in Austin, and Washington, D.C., as well as our regulators at the PUCT in Austin and NMPRC in Santa Fe.
Okay, a couple of questions for Carla. Thank you, Adrian. So Carla, why did Carla say yesterday, well, actually Tuesday, that we couldn't stop this sale?
I'm sorry. The sale of El Paso Electric, when IIF announced that they were purchasing the utility, they made commitments to the public and explained that there were 7 entities that had to make a decision on this merger. The city of El Paso is one entity. The way that the sale would be halted is if one of the 7 entities said no to the transaction. The city of El Paso has intervened in the case at the Texas Public Utility Commission, and through the leadership of council, we've been able to amend the original proposed transaction that would allow for additional protections for the citizens of El Paso. They will be required to have several safeguards, they call them ring fencing. In very general terms, they will not be able to take the dividends out of El Paso without a vote of the disinterested directors. They will also have the capacity in the event that they are not provided equity by IIF to issue stock, to borrow money. They are given other protections that were not in the original proposal. The reason, the other thing you need to consider is that the city of El Paso has the franchise agreement. Currently, as worded, the franchise agreement states that the city of El Paso has to consent to the assignment to the new entity, which will be El Paso Electric after it is merged. However, if the city was to deny the sale, the franchise agreement assignment, the city of El Paso would lose out $25 million a year. Those $25 million a year are used to maintain the city's rights of way. That is the way that the city ensures that you continue to have safe and reliable electricity. I would encourage the citizens of El Paso and all of you here today to go onto the city's website. You will see copies of the franchise agreement as well as explanations in very simple terms about what the franchise agreement does to protect our citizens. And I think that that's why I would tell you that we can't stop the sale of El Paso Electric.
Okay, and the question is here, why did the city not have a representative at the PUC meeting December 9th?
The city of El Paso hired Mr. Gordon, Norman Gordon, to be present at the meeting. he and I spoke about the meeting. We had not been asked to be present at the meeting. The chair had specifically requested that IIF be present at the meeting. We did submit a request for a postponement that was denied. We were not present. However, we have been present at every meeting since then, and we will continue to be present at the PUC. The city of El Paso was represented, as well as the citizens of this community through the employee union as well. You have been represented by council in the stance that they took at the very beginning of the PUC filing. The city of El Paso opposed the transaction at the very beginning because we saw that there was deficiencies in the manner in which the transaction was going to take place. Had it not been for the representation of our council and the insistence of certain things taking place at the PUC, we would not be at the place that we are here today. So you have been represented. You are at a better point now than you were when the original filing took place in September.
Okay.
So if the franchise is 25 million, what are you going to grow it to? Will that be 50 million 10 years from now?
Well,
what's your expectation and the prediction?
Can I answer the question?
Sure, go ahead.
So for purposes of explaining to you how the franchise agreement works, we are capped at 5% of the gross revenues currently. That's across the state. We can't charge more than that for a franchise agreement to an electric utility. We have a provision in our franchise agreement that currently expires in 2030. That money is currently between now and 2030 dedicated to the Medical Center of the Americas, which is a biomedical industry that is taking place in the center of El Paso. That money is dedicated to them. After 2030, that money was going to go back to El Paso Electric. As a result of the negotiations, can I finish? As a result of the negotiations through the franchise agreement, El Paso Electric has agreed that after 2030, the money will remain in the city coffers and we will be able to use it towards the general fund to continue to maintain our right to work. So that money will remain. Now, sir, just very briefly, when you ask whether we can grow the franchise agreement, that would require an increase in the franchise fee. However, that would require that we also raise your rates. So it is a relation that we don't necessarily want to go there because you have to pay more in electricity.
But the ratepayers pay the franchise fee.
So
Forget raising rates, the new population growth and the growth of the city should, right? So you don't have to raise the rates.
why can't IIF wait for a feasibility study for non-private alternatives to be considered? Why is the sale being rushed with little to no dialogue?
So the question is, why can't IIF wait for a feasibility study? The feasibility study, as we propose it, would take several years before it would be completed. IIF has this. So IIF has proceeded. IIF has requested to purchase the utility in El Paso Electric, and IIF have entered into this agreement. The city's ability to stop the sale would entail the termination of the franchise agreement. The city could say we don't want the sale to go through, but however, the city of El Paso would also be at a loss at $25 million on the franchise agreement. So as much as some of you don't like where this is headed, we are doing as much as we can, and we have negotiated as much as we could to protect the citizens of El Paso to continue to have a reliable utility in El Paso. You need to remember that our concern and council's concern was that the utility remain in El Paso and that its headquarters not be moved. Those are things that are important to this community.
Okay, the next two questions are for Adrian. Is El Paso Electric only interested in its Wall Street profits and short-term gains? And why are you allowing this corporate takeover?
So as I noted, one of the things that we are right now is we're a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange. And that creates some pluses and it creates a lot of minuses. One of the big minuses is that you don't necessarily control the ownership of your company. As we know, if a company is on the open market, people buy stock, other companies buy stock. And if you look at the story of other companies, stock has been purchased and the decisions have been made by the ownership of that company without the people having any control over it. As we noted a couple of months ago, El Paso Electric Company, and if you read in the publicly filed documents with the Securities and Exchange Commission, there was a knock on the door. A company knocks on the door, and El Paso Electric Company is obligated, the board of directors and management of the company is obligated to open the door and to see who's on the other side. As a result, you may not necessarily like who's on the other side. You have to engage in the process. You have to talk to other people and other entities to see what's available out there. That's a fiduciary obligation of the board and management of the company. In doing so, you see people that you like, you see people that scare you, you see people that you want to go with, and you see people that could be great for your community. We're fortunate because this is not always the story that happens when you go through one of those processes. We ended up with the Infrastructure Investments Fund, and this is an organization, again, that has portfolio companies, that maintains the headquarters in their communities, that has a key investment in the communities. For example, this economic development fund that the city of El Paso negotiated that resulted in an economic fund dedicated solely for the Texas Service Territory that is managed by the Economic Development Fund, or the Economic Development Department of the city of El Paso, is something that many and most, and in fact, when you look at it, almost all communities do not get. So as a result, that is what we went through the process. Being a New York Stock Exchange company with an obligation to look at how, when somebody knocks on the door, those are the things that we had to go through. We have a fiduciary obligation to go to, and fortunately, it ended up with this outcome rather than some of the others that were out there.
Okay, two questions that have the same question, basically. How will the level of philanthropy change for nonprofit partners? Will El Paso Electric continue to support nonprofits in the communities?
Again, let me tell you the story about other communities. This is a situation in which in other communities, when there has been one of these transactions and one of these acquisitions, the philanthropy disappears, the employee base disappears, and so that means what? The employee volunteer hours, the participation on the nonprofit boards, the charitable contributions and the community partnership grants disappear. That's not the case here. The Infrastructure Investments Fund has continued to maintain the same level of funding that we have for the next 3 years of our charitable contributions at a minimum of $1.2 million. That's the charitable contribution that we provide financially to the community. And in terms of the hours and the employees and the membership with nonprofits and community boards and volunteer hours, that continues. Those are things that we will get to continue by being El Paso Electric Company in El Paso versus what happens in other communities.
Sorry, that was only
Okay, what does the EPE board look after the sale? And what is a disinterested director?
What was the first one again? I'm sorry.
What does the EPE board look like after the sale?
Can you explain the $21 million
So-
over the course of 3 years will be
So the one thing,
$1.36 per month?
I will answer the questions that they're submitted.
What does the EPE
So the
board
question
look
was,
like
what does
after the
EPE
sale?
board look like after the sale? Check the Public Utility Commission of Texas order. This defines what the structure of our board, as we noted, the City of El Paso, the Office of Public Utility.
No more
Council,
corporate
the Public
greed!
Utility
Public
Council.
control is what we need! No more corporate greed! Public control is what we need! No more corporate greed! Public control is what we need! No more corporate greed! Public control is what we need! No more corporate greed! Public control is what we need! No more corporate greed! Public control is what we need! No more corporate greed! Public control is what we need! No more corporate greed! Public control is what we need! No more corporate greed! Public control is what we need!
I apologize to those citizens who are here to interact in a civil manner for those kind of demonstrations. I'm so sorry that you have to say that.
Shut up.
I'm so sorry that you have to endure those interruptions because we're running out of
Shut up.
time.
We're not
so
sorry.
We're going to continue with the question.
We're not
So
sorry.
what is the EPE board look like?
What we have to say, to ask questions and to hear the answers, and as I noted, I'm going to stay here one-on-one afterward to answer questions. With regard to, without the
camera.
So with the infrastructure investment, as I noted, please check the order of the Public Utility Commission of Texas, one of those bodies that is required to evaluate the structure of this acquisition. If you look at what that has in there, it defines all of the EP board requirements. It defines all of the requirements that were negotiated by the City of El Paso to protect the community, that were negotiated by the Public Utility Commission of Texas staff, and the Office of Public Utility Counsel, which is charged and is required to overlook and protect the small business customers and residential customers in the state of Texas. These are all requirements that were in there for the board. Something that we get in that we don't have now is an element of local control. An element of local control.
You're disrupting the civil process.
This is corrupt.
It's not simple, it's.
Yeah, you're not civil.
An element of local control. An element of local control.
I'm not different.
That is in there is that we will have at a minimum, 2 board members from the local community. That's not something we have now that is a requirement. Well, we have been fortunate and have local representation on our board, and this is a New York Stock result of this agreement with IIF.
Okay, this question is for Carla. Take it again. Says, if you're obligated to explore all options and see who's on the other side of the door, why?
We're not skipping the feasibility study. Council has directed us to obtain a feasibility study, but in order to use the city's monies wisely and correctly, we're going to have to spend a substantial amount of money to do that, and it's not going to take 3 months. It's going to be a longer process. The city has committed, and we've requested.
Say 3 months. We have quotes from them. We've spoken to those advisors. They said it doesn't take over a year, not even half a year.
Please.
So why are you all
So make your
surprised?
question written. Because there's 3 or 4 questions the same.
JP lies. JP lies. JP lies. JP lies. JP lies. JP lies. JP lies.
Rachel Rice! JP lies! Rachel Rice! JP lies! Rachel Rice! JP lies! Rachel Rice! JP lies! Rachel Rice! JP lies!
Similar question. What happened to the procurement of the feasibility? 2, 3 questions about the feasibility study.
We will be seeing another item on the feasibility study this week in regards to that conversation with council.
Okay, so
So council is doing something about what the public is requesting.
again, another question, why are we not waiting for the feasibility study? So that's another question. Okay, this question, I'm not sure who it would be, but where are the 3 owners of Sun Jupiter Holdings? What is Sun Jupiter Holdings? Who would answer this question?
I'll answer the question. So, as I said before, I think there is some confusion in the general partner that helps manage the fund. I think those are the 3 owners that are being referred to. But again, the owners of Sun Jupiter, which owner of El Paso Electric, are the investors. 512 pension funds represent those members.
What are the 3 owners you put in the FER commission?
Okay, another question. What is a disinterested director and does the sale of EPE create more or less local control?
Okay. Okay, so a disinterested director is something that is part of a very, very long negotiation that happened in Texas. So there is a requirement for independence on the board of directors, very similar to what exists in the requirements.
I think so. On this side, it doesn't cut off.
Is that better? The mic works over here, so I'll stand on this side. So there are requirements for independence for a New York Stock Exchange definition of independence. The Public Utility Commission, working with the interveners, including El Paso, took it a step further and had a disinterested director. That is somebody that has no relationship whatsoever to any IIF company, and they took it a step further for extra added protection that had no relationship to JP Morgan. And then what the disinterested director controls is the payment of dividends that are coming out of the company. So it's an extra level of protection in addition to the requirements around credit ratings that these disinterested directors have to make that vote. So that is the definition of the disinterested.
Okay, for Adrian, will the IIF continue to practice of punishing rooftop solar customers with a $30 minimum bill?
One of the things that we work on is we have to rate cases and we have to go to the Public Utility Commission.
Parties anytime settle on how the rate structures are done. The parties come together and discuss how rate structure is done at the Public Utility Commission. And in many cases, the parties will come together in an agreement. And then the end result will be some things that are result in customer charges in some areas, and other areas that don't have customer charges. In this particular case, the most recent case that we had, there was a minimum bill that was presented that all the parties in the case agreed on. And so that is something that is governed by the Public Utility Commission of Texas. And that's something that we'll have to deal with going forward.
That's unique to El Paso Electric.
It is different and is not something that is part of the infrastructure investment fund transaction.
Are they going to continue?
Okay, there are three different questions that are basically asking the same thing. Do you think it's sufficient for the ratepayers to receive a measly $136 per month for 3 years? Do you think it is sufficient that ratepayers will receive a measly $136 per month? There was an agreed 21 million customer credit to be allocated over 36 months. Please explain this credit. What does this entail?
So one of the things that happens when there is one of these, many times, communities get a customer credit. And those customer credits are very large. The $21 million over 3 years is actually something that's very large compared to what has been provided to other communities. Encore, one of our fellow utilities in the North Texas and West Texas area, went through one of these agreements. And as a result, they got $14 million for 1 point. So when you compare these rate credits and benefits to the community that have been shown compared to other communities, this is actually one of the largest.
Okay, and again, three questions with the same estimate. In the agreement, the new terms explain what you mean in conditions change for the 5 years, what will happen after 5 years. There's a 5-year commitment with EPE employees to remain employed by IIF, stated that they want to own EPE 10 plus years. Why didn't the city proposition include a 5-year job security deal for the workers like EPEs and IIF deal?
Let me clarify a couple of items on the questions regarding the 5 years and the job commitment. Something that happens again in many of these agreements is that people ask, well, we need to provide a commitment to the employment. And if you look at the ones that have happened over the country, many times they only say 1 year, 2 years. So this was something that was provided for 5 years. Why? Because at least it's more than anybody has ever provided in the state of Texas and the state of New Mexico. And with regard to what working with the city and what the city negotiated, is that they noted that there will be no job losses as a result of the transaction. So what happens many times when a company buys another company, and again, this is not what's happening here, is they take the jobs and they roll them up. That means that there's a parent company that has its own HR department, its own lawyers, its own customer care representatives, and as a result, what ends up happening there is the jobs in the community for the company that was purchased disappear. As I noted, El Paso's headquarters remains in El Paso. The jobs remain in El Paso. IIF does not have an operating company, nor are they rolling these jobs into another company. What they are doing is making a commitment to the workforce of this community to say that they are keeping the jobs here in El Paso, which is something that, if you could look at other agreements around the country, is something that they don't have.
Okay, another two questions that are on the same thing. Be more specific, what you mean by the San Jupiter IIF US2, its affiliates will maintain an arm's length relationship. In the new agreement, define what you mean by arm's length.
So one of the things that is to do renewables in El Paso, he would have to submit a bid along with all the other companies that are interested. And we would have to go through that process the way we would as if I didn't work with Carlos or interact with him on any basis. That's the term that they mean by arm's length. It's a term of art, for lack of a better word, that essentially dictates how you're supposed to interact with other companies by the Public Utility Commission of Texas, by the FERC, and by the NMPRC.
Okay, will there be any changes to pensions for current retirees and future retirees if the sale goes through? Similar question, with solar and wind energy available, what happens to present employees' retirement options during this process?
No, this question was asked in the last meeting about employee pensions, and as I noted, there are no changes regarding employee pensions related to the IIF transaction. This is something completely different. As we noted, and I talked about this in the last meeting as well, there's federal laws that dictate protections for pensions, and it's called the Pension Protection Act. Those are all still in place, and any federal and state requirements regarding pensions are still in place.
It says, I've only heard how this deal benefits stakeholders, but why should El Pasoans ever want JP Morgan a monopoly over our utility?
So one thing to note is, if I've noted we're a publicly traded company. We have to file what's called a proxy every year. If you look at what is in that proxy, you'll see who owns El Paso Electric companies. And it's a lot of people that we can't control. It's banks, large investments, and we, as I noted, that ownership changes on a daily basis, minute by minute, it changes throughout the day. In this case, what we have is somebody that I can pick up the phone and actually ask questions of, and again, a resource in calling our investor. And that's not something that we have today. In terms of the word monopoly, because I know that word gets used a lot, the key thing is that we are already a regulated monopoly. And somebody had asked in the last meeting whether or not that's a good thing. It's a great thing to be a regulated monopoly. And the reasoning is that cost of capital and trying to have other utilities in the same area, it's cost prohibitive. And as a result, what you want is you want heavy regulation. And that's what we have. We're regulated, as I said, in Austin, Santa Fe, Washington, the city of El Paso, and all of that still continues. Being a regulated monopoly is a great thing because of that regulation. That regulation is what keeps our rates in a good position and makes sure that our electric service is provided in a safe and reliable manner.
Okay, thank you, Eden. Now, question for Landy. Why did you put up for sale the last electric utility you owned, Electricity Northwest in England, serving 6 million people after owning it for 10 years?
So that is an issue about risk mitigation. I'm sure you've seen the newspaper articles about what's going on in the United Kingdom right now. They took a vote on Brexit, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, and then there have been a number of challenges, referendums, other things that have gone on. That has basically flowed down into the business community and created some real impacts to the way that companies operate. That was something that we operated in partnership with another entity. They made an assessment that that market was no longer a place where their investors' capital should be. They moved along with the process, and it sort of forced our hand in that situation. So we were in a situation for risk mitigation that we needed to sell.
Okay, and I believe this question might have been answered already, but it says, why weren't the employees given the same 10-year guarantee as the headquarters?
I think that was a situation, and I will say that there's been some updated commitments on this. This was part of the negotiation that was done, and it was looking and scanning what had happened across a number of these utility transactions. And in all cases, in working in collaboration with the El Paso Electric Company, when we were in the process, we took what had been done as precedent and took it a bit farther. So all of the commitments that you see in the original document that came out were actually industry leading at the time. And then in collaboration with all of the interveners that have been in the processes, and it actually has been a very, very significant process since the deal was announced, and then including the interactions that we've had with the city, I think that you will see that the employee commitment that is in the franchise agreement is actually quite a bit better than was originally proposed, and it's basically a flat prohibition that says that there will be no merger-related employee issues.
Is IIF private equity?
No, we're an infrastructure fund. We're long-term. We invest not only in the companies but in the communities that IIF is a part of. The rationale behind private equity is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. These investments are made when the private equity fund goes in. They run up the debt, they strip out the employee costs, and then in a 5 to 7 year time frame, they sell the company. We have made a long-term commitment both to the company and to the community, and intend to be a long-term partner, and will be making the return over a 20, 30, 40-year period as we're in partnership with this company and this community.
Okay, two questions that have the same. How will IIF balance the need to protect ratepayers while meeting a return on investment for its shareholders? And then another one is, how do you expect to make your 4.3 billion back without raising rates?
Well, I mean, that's going to be up to the company to continue on with the safe, reliable, affordable service that it provides today. That is what underpins the investment, and it's as simple as that. Relative to the question about how do you protect the ratepayers while the investors, in a lot of circumstances, I think Dan referred to this earlier, and frankly, we talked about this last Tuesday. There are 2.5 million investors in Texas and New Mexico that are going to be part of the IIF investment in El Paso Electric. So in a lot of circumstances, the investors and the customers can be the same people. And so what is important to remember is that for the investors to see their return, they have to have a situation where the customers enjoy the same level of service or better that they have now. They have to have a certain situation where the employees have opportunity in a growing company. And the other thing that I'll say is it's something that is unique to utility companies. You have the oversight of the Regulatory Commission. So everything that is done has to be done with a prudency review of the Public Utility Commission. It is filed, it is transparent, it is public, and it is a process that the company will continue to go through, and the jurisdiction will not change after the transaction from the Public Utility Commission of Texas, the New Mexico Public Regulatory Commission, or the City of El Paso.
In your portfolio of companies, why did Southwest Water's rates increase?
I think the circumstance that you're talking about relative to Southwest Water is what happened in Alabama. It was a system that had basically not been invested in for a fairly substantial period of time. At the time the transaction was done, and Southwest Water took the company over from the municipality, there was an agreement that investment would have to be made and rates would have to increase. That was done as part of the original transaction. And then there were changes in law that required new investments that were made, and that was something that had to be done to make compliance, but at the same time, costs had to be recovered.
Okay, and these three questions are around the same thing. Given JP Morgan Chase $40 million fine with FERC, how will they ensure that the same racketeering and market manipulation is not repeated? JP Morgan controls IIF. Has JP Morgan been charged or fined for any financial crimes? Why did FERC deem JP Morgan's application deficient on December 5th?
Actually, these two questions are the same, not around it.
Okay.
So I'm handing back the question that says about the deficiency application, so I'm going to answer that because that's different and distinct from these two. To answer the question about the fines, yes, JP Morgan has been fined, but those are JP Morgan groups, again, that are not part of the infrastructure investment fund. I think the question here, I'm going to read it again. The $400 million with FERC, where they ensure that the same racketeering and market manipulation is not repeated. That we've put up the portfolio companies that are part of IIF. They don't get involved in speculation. They are done with the mindset of either regulated or contractual cash flows. And again, these fines are entities that are not related to IIF. Now, I'm going to come back to the question about the FERC response. So the question is why did FERC deem JP Morgan's application deficient on December 5th? So I'm going to make the assumption that the reference here is IIF's application because it was not JP Morgan's application. And so what they did is they had questions. And FERC, if you go and look at what happens when FERC has questions, they issue what is called a deficiency notice. And so that is their opportunity to say, we have more questions about what you filed. This is a term of art from FERC. And we have responded to that, and the filing went in earlier this month, and the public comment period ends on January 29th.
Okay, and then two questions that are very similar. What happens after 10 years? How will IIF invest in the electric company infrastructure over the next 10 years? And then what happens after the 10 years?
After the 10 years, we keep going. How will we invest? Well, let me come back to the 10 years for just a second. I mean, so this was a request in the negotiation. So if you, again, going back to what happens in these transactions, there are different requirements for different commissions. And so the longest commitment that has been given on something like this was 10 years. We came in as a perpetual long-term investor and said we were going to have a long-term partnership. There was a number that was asked for. This is the longest number that was given, so we put it out there. There is nothing magical about that number. It was just a request for it. We intend to be part of this community and have invested in it. I think originally the Economic Development Fund was over 20 years. We shortened that up at the request of the city, but that again shows the long-term commitment that IIF and its investors have to El Paso. And then the question here is, how will IIF invest in electric company infrastructure over the next 10 years? The business plan and the operations of the company will still remain with the management team of the company. And so as they look to provide the safe, reliable, affordable electric service that they do today, they will continue to have capital programs and budgets that will require investment. And so that will be something that the company does. But again, I'll bring it back to the point that all of that is done with a prudency review by the Public Utility Commission of Texas, the New Mexico Public Regulatory Commission, the City of El Paso, and any rate impacts or any capital investments that are going in all have to be approved by those entities.
Okay, and then this question is repeats what you just answered before. Why did FERC deem JP Morgan's application to purchase EPE deficient?
So again, IIF's application, and again, when it's just a term of art, they had more questions, and those were filed.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. Now I'm going to ask some questions of Carla. Carla, it says here, instead of letting El Paso Electric be acquired by JP Morgan, why can the city buy the company? I think you answered it okay, but it's being asked again. Why can't the city just buy the electric company?
So the city of El Paso, under its franchise agreement, does not have an option to purchase the company. We would have had to have bid during the process. Furthermore, the question has been raised in the past as to why the city doesn't use its power of eminent domain. The Texas Supreme Court has stated that the city cannot use its power of eminent domain to place a value on the property. On the utility, we would have had to have purchased it in the open market. And again, the selling price is $4.3 billion. It would require that we raise everybody's property taxes to an outrageous amount, and we couldn't afford it.
Okay, and then I think, again, it's been asked a different way, but in the interest of transparency, why couldn't El Paso be a municipally owned public utility like El Paso Water? Why couldn't EPE be a municipally owned public utility like El Paso Water?
There are some utilities in the state of Texas that were created in the late 1800s, mid 1900s, that were created and were purchased by the utility or created around the utility, and those are grandfathered. Out in El Paso, that's just not how the utility developed. They began privately and they continued to grow with the city, but we never purchased it. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight, and it's going to require a lot of money and a lot of changes in the law to do that. So.
Okay. If IIF sells EPE, does the city of El Paso still have the ability to approve any future sale? If IIF sells EPE, does the city of El Paso still have the ability to approve any future sale?
Yes, the city of El Paso does have the ability to continue to approve a future sale. The current language of the franchise agreement is the reason why the city has a seat at the table currently, because we have to assign the franchise. That language is not changing. The new proposed language that is being considered by council in the next couple of weeks continues to have language, and in the future, if El Paso Electric is purchased by another entity, the city again will have a seat at the table.
It says, why do you claim 25 million to the city per year would be lost if EPE sale to IIF or some Jupiter is blocked? EPE will still be paying 25 million. Why not? to the city.
Okay. So if the city were to deny the franchise assignment, the franchise terminates, the city would lose the $25 million because the reason they pay the $25 million is as a result of the franchise. So they pay for the use of the right-of-ways, and we place the value on the use of the right-of-ways at that amount. If we have no contract with them, they don't have to continue to pay the $25 million.
Okay. You may have answered already. When the city council requested an extension to vote, why did no one from the city appear before the PUC? And why did the IIF representative lie and say that everything was processed without issue?
I've already answered that question. I won't speak for the IIF representative.
Okay. Why do IIF, EPE, and the city claim that the franchise agreement is paid by EPE when the money ultimately comes from ratepayers?
The money does come from ratepayers, but it's through the franchise agreement. It's a pass-through fee.
Okay. Let me see. I think those are the questions that I have for you, Carla. Thank you. Oh, no, here's the last, another one. When the feasibility study is completed, how many months until municipalization actually will be put into effect?
I can't answer that question. I don't know the time frame for that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm available to answer questions as well afterwards.
Okay. Adrian, let's see if I have an additional group of questions for you. So, again, there's a lot of questions about the franchise agreement. What is the franchise agreement? Why is the franchise agreement important to EPE?
So the franchise agreement, every utility that operates in the country has a franchise agreement where we pay money to use the streets and public rights of way. It's essentially like a rental agreement, a street rental charge, in fact, is the way that we define it with the city of El Paso. So that's why you have a franchise agreement. You have it essentially to compensate for the use of and taking the space of, and sometimes having to block and change out light poles and fixtures and run wire on public rights of way. So it's to compensate the city for our use of those public rights of way.
Okay, concerning the franchise, how does that apply for the utility right-of-ways that are on the county roads and not city roads?
That's a different situation for those that are in the county in Texas. That's dictated by state law. The Texas Transportation Code actually covers how we're supposed to operate county roads and put all the wires there. Franchises in Texas are done via the franchise agreements with your municipality. So we have them with El Paso, we have them with Vinton and all the other incorporated municipalities.
Okay, will revenue from EPE be used to support other ventures, existing or new?
One thing that I want to note on that, because I guess it's a vague question, but remember, we're regulated by the Public Utility Commission of Texas. We can't take the money that we utilize for resources here and all of a sudden get into another venture. The only way that we could ever do that would be that if the state law in Texas and New Mexico and the federal law authorized to do so.
Okay. How can a private investment company such as IIF, which is owned by a mega bank such as JP Morgan and headquartered in New York and London, possibly be a good thing for El Paso, considering the clear wealth flow away from our community?
So one thing I want to make sure people also understand is that this isn't just El Paso, and this isn't just a structure for El Paso Electric Company that nobody else has ever seen before. There are a number of electric utilities around the country that have similar structures. And as I noted also, right now, if you were to look at the list of the top 25 largest owners of the company, many of them are banks with their headquarters in New York. I can't tell you exactly who to call at any one of those when we have questions. We have general interactions with these investors. That is actually the structure of electric utilities in many places around the country.
Okay. What recourse will we as consumers have if and when complaints are not resolved satisfactorily?
The Public Utility Commission of Texas, you have it now. The first step is obviously, we've got great customer care representatives. I'm happy to note that when the phone rings, they pick up, and we try to pick up in a minute or less. But if your complaint is not resolved, you have the right to go to the Public Utility Commission of Texas. For our New Mexico customers, there's a consumer hotline that will still remain in place. In the event that there's ever a customer care issue related to our company, you can still call the state government on it and with their consumer protection line.
Why are you allowing Wall Street to take over a local company?
As we noted, New York Stock Exchange Company, we're on Wall Street. In this case, we actually have Infrastructure Investment Fund, which is a company that owns other portfolio companies that invests in those communities, a much different structure than we are right now.
Will the electric company do away with the ABC plan, budget billing?
I think that's a specific question regarding a program that we have for budget billing. There are no plans to do away with any budget billing. And as I understand it, we don't have any plans to do away with any of those. And that's something separate and different from this involvement with IIF. But I'm not aware of any reason why we are changing those plans.
Okay, if the sale of El Paso Electric goes through, what will happen to electric rates? Will they go up or down?
Rates go up and down. We have to give fuel refunds periodically throughout the year. This is all governed by the PUCT. As a result of this transaction, in fact, there is nothing related to rates regarding the transaction. We're required by state law in the state of Texas to go in for rate reviews once every 4 years, and one of those we're going to be required to go in 2021 by state law. And so these are things that we have to do. And sometimes as a result of investment, which you'll see the poles and wires and a new generation, including the new solar. We're going to have to go in and seek recovery. And at the same time, you'll also see, as the price of fuel decreases, fuel refunds on your bills as well. So as I know, the prices go up and down, and we're required to go in for rate reviews periodically.
Okay, why has Senator Rodriguez and Representative Escobar requested a full evidentiary hearing with FERC and NRC?
What's great is, as I noted, this is a process that is reviewed by multiple people in multiple state capitals and in the federal government. And so what they are asking for is for a full evaluation by FERC, and FERC is doing that right now. FERC has asked questions, the federal government evaluates this. Texas has done it, and as we noted, and with the work of the city of El Paso and all the other interviews, we've gone through that process in Texas, and we're going through it right now in New Mexico. So there's multiple eyes from multiple parties at multiple levels of government.
How will you continue to support the El Paso community? Will decisions be made at the local level?
One thing that's great about this, and as I noted, this is not the story of other communities where decisions are then made somewhere else. The utility headquarters remains here. Management remains here. Decisions are made here in El Paso. That will continue.
Okay. And then why can third-party electricity providers participate with EPE in the West Texas, Southern New Mexico market?
For those that weren't there on Tuesday, this was a question that we were asked there, and it's essentially, we're in the Western Electric Coordinating Council. It's a technical answer, but again, this is a technical situation. We're in the same electric grid from our little corner of Texas all the way up to Washington. The structure of electric utilities here in this part of the grid is very different. In terms of third-party interconnections, we do have some, but those are governed by federal law. And as those actions that we take in order to interconnect third-party power producers is all governed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and will continue to be governed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
Why are there zero commitments to renewables?
I think if you look at the franchise agreement, and I think this is something that the city of El Paso took an extremely strong leadership position on. There is a very detailed renewable study to note that how we are going to be able to assess our system to figure out how we're going to be able to integrate more renewables on our system.
Okay, and I think this question might be better answered by Len, even Carlos. How is JP Morgan not 100% affiliated of IIF, considering JP Morgan executives are on the board of every company IIF owns?
So again, because the group is the infrastructure investment group, and their sole purpose is the relationship that they have contractually with the investors. Again, on a day-to-day basis, myself, Dan, our colleagues, the only thing that we're concerned about are the investors. I mean, we talked about this over and over again. And so that's why we've made it clear that it is not affiliate. We have agreed to the protections that exist that came out in the order, or will come out in the order with the Public Utility Commission of Texas, to ensure that all of the things that are done with the company maintain independent, they stay in this community. As Adrian said, there will be that local control, and at the same time, everything that is done with any affiliates, whether it be companies within the IIF portfolio, or frankly anyone else, will have strong affiliate standards to ensure that it's being done for the best interests of the company and its customers.
Do you have any black or Mexican investment managers on your team, sir?
When JP Morgan took over your company, what changed, Carlos? When JP Morgan took over your company, what changed?
What changed was basically the access to capital and the ability to expand it and take it to the next level. Basically, we preserve our identity, we preserve the management team. And let's be clear, in that case, we were the very little management team acquired for a more substantial enterprise, in this case, the fund. IIF didn't appoint a single executive inside the company. And going back to your question, sir, I'm Venezuelan, I'm Latino.
So what has it been like to work with IIF JP Morgan?
I'm sorry?
What has it been like to work with IIF JP Morgan?
It's been very interesting because we are exposed to a kind of, with certain things that we were not exposed before. We are part of a bigger family. For example, something that has not been explained here today. We talked about Sonetics, $1.5 billion in renewables in the last 5 years. Well, IIF has invested $4.3 billion. So within the fund, a third of the fund is renewables. Okay, we have a group within the fund where we sit down, engineers, the chairs of the company, the CEOs, etc., etc. So basically, we sit down and we share experiences. It's not only Sonetics. Guys, we're talking here, we're bringing experiences from, in the case of Sonetics, from Japan, from Italy. You know how difficult it is to do environmental regulations in France? How difficult and engineering and challenging is the grid in Puerto Rico? We're talking about building in the desert here, for example. We have experience building in the Atacama Desert with windows, but also there's other companies. There's Ventian, it's a pan-European wind producer, mostly wind. Is in Portugal, is in Belgium, is in Italy, is in Portugal, Belgium, UK, France. We have a case of another sister companies, Novatus. So it's bringing all that collaboration at a level that we can share and bring together a much better and efficient transformation.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. So I just handed Landy this question. It's a little bit complicated, so you may want to read through it and then.
Yeah, I'll read that out here. So again, I am looking for analysis, growth projections past 2030, taking into account population and industry, growth that will lift the franchise valuation. What do those numbers look like? Surely you expect to grow profits for your pension investors and franchise population. I think what the question is asking is what is the expectation of growth over the period of time past 2030? So I'm not. I'm sorry.
Up to 2030.
Up to 2030.
Now, I'm an investment banker. I work on Wall Street. I'm not controversial or adversarial here, all right? I believe there's a great deal getting ready to come down here, and I just want to know what the franchise valuation was.
Sure, you're good. We're good. Let him finish.
It's okay.
Yeah, just. No, you're good. You're good. Continue. Yeah, let him finish.
He addressed me, all right? Can I answer? All right?
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir.
So I think I'm actually not aware of any growth projections that the company has done.
That's all.
I think what has happened. I can talk about what has happened historically in the community, and I think we addressed this earlier on. That El Paso is actually one of the fastest growing cities in Texas, and quite frankly, one of the fastest growing cities in the country. I believe the growth that the city has seen is about 1.1%, and that's built into the business plan that the company has, and it was part of the resource planning exercise that they went through. But I'm not aware of any other projections beyond that, sir.
Okay. Now let me ask these two questions that I think you already addressed the list. I'm going to combine them. Why did you sell Electricity Northwest to a Japanese electric company and Chinese state-owned investment company, leaving 6 million English citizens electric utility out of their hands? How is a 10-year holding such as with Electricity Northwest a long-term investment? So they're both about Electricity Northwest.
Yeah, again, this was a risk mitigation situation just because of the situation that is happening in the UK. You know, the investment environment there, and frankly, the political environment is extremely difficult. And we had a partner that made a decision that they were going to exit, and so, you know, somewhat compelled us to move that forward, and that was ultimately why the decision was taken.
Okay, thank you. Now, some questions for Carla. Says a purchase of EPE would be paid through revenue bonds, not property taxes, correct?
Maybe that's a way of structuring the deal, but that's a large, that's debt that you have to pay off with taxes, so it's still backed by your taxes.
Okay. The franchise agreement will not terminate if the sale is blind. EPE will only be able to use public right-of-way and to sell electricity, while a franchise agreement is enforced, so EPE cannot cancel the franchise agreement. I don't know, there's a question here, but I'm gonna read it. Hope to remain in business. So in detail, explain how the city could lose $25 million a year by keeping everything exactly as it is today.
You can't keep everything as it is today. The deal is moving through. What the question I believe is asking is, if the city stops the deal that says we don't assign the franchise, the terms of the franchise is currently worded, state that if the city does not consent to the assignment, the franchise terminates. That is the way that the deal was written. Back in 2004, the city had the right to purchase the utility at a similar amount of price, but back in those days, it was a smaller amount, but it's the same amount as today. And council decided to not exercise the option. The language was amended and a new contract was written in 2005 that states what I have stated now. We have the right to consent, and if we don't consent, the franchise terminates. That's how the agreement is structured.
Okay, thank you. Now, for Adrian, why should we trust the PUC when they were the regulators behind the second largest bankruptcy ever in 2014 with Energy Future Holdings in Texas?
So people understand actually what happens with Energy Future Holdings in Texas. It's actually because of the ring fencing provisions that were imposed by the Public Utility Commission of Texas that protected Encore from what occurred at the parent company, Energy Future Holdings. And one of the things that ended up becoming a model, as we were talking about throughout our engagement, was the degree of ring fencing that the Public Utility Commission of Texas was going to impose. For those who don't know, ring fencing is what is used to protect the structure of the utility from its parent company and essentially maintains that whatever occurs at the parent company level does not adversely impact the utility itself, the term ring fencing. The PUC team, along with the city's involvement and PUC staff and Office of Public Utility Council, and especially all of the other customers represented by other parties, made absolutely sure that ring fencing provisions were imposed on the El Paso Electric Company IIF acquisition. Similar, and in some cases more robustly than the ring fencing provisions that protected Encore from Energy Future Holdings.
What financial impact would schools face if Rate 41 went away with this acquisition?
One thing to note, again, the rate, for those who don't know, Rate 41 group is the customer class that is served by what we call rate number 41. This is for public authorities. They have agreed to the acquisition. One thing that was never on the table as part of this acquisition involved a changing in rates. So the Rate 41 rate was never an issue that could be brought up in this particular case. In any case, we have worked with Rate 41 group, and again, in conjunction with the city and all the other parties, to make sure that the Rate 41 group is now part of the settlement agreement at the PUCT.
What happens to EPE if the sale doesn't go through?
I think a key thing here is what happens to the community if the sale doesn't go through. We lose the $80 million economic development fund that IIF is committed to the city. We lose the $21 million rate credits that have been committed to the city. We lose the degrees of commitments that we have right now, that we have via this acquisition, that we don't have as El Paso Electric Company right now. Right now, there's no restriction that says that the headquarters has to be and remain within the city limits of El Paso. So with IIF's commitment and with their long-term commitment to the city of El Paso and our company, we get something via this acquisition that we don't have and that we won't have if this acquisition is not closed.
How much will the CEO and Mr. Gilbert make up on the deal being sealed? Do you think it's fair we are only getting $1.36 a month for only 3 years?
So this gets into a question as to how people in management at a company are compensated. Many times you're compensated via stock, and that's just the nature of being a publicly traded corporation. So as a result, any ownership of stock that I have is exactly what, like any shareholder of the company, will receive the commensurate value of $68.25. It's the nature of being a shareholder in the company, which again is a way that members of management in publicly traded companies and many employees are compensated.
Okay, just a quick announcement, just because in the interest of time, we allowed the questions to continue plus the 6:15, 6:30 time that we ask people to submit questions. As you can see, questions keep on coming and we can be here all day all night to continue to answer. So we're gonna get through these questions, and again, they will remain behind for you to address them individually after the question and answer session is completed. So I'm going to just do a lightning round and answer and ask as many questions as possible so we can get through them. How do EPE employees feel about the sale of the company?
And this is one where I want to make sure that we do our best as management to explain what is going on. I think it is a key issue that as part of our acquisition, we work with and we're able to get the agreement of the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers, our union employees. I think this is something that I'm proud to say that with the employee commitments that IIF has provided, we get something that we don't have now. And as a result, it's incumbent upon me to make sure that I continually speak to our employees who I'm extremely proud to work with and to have spoken with and to hear their concerns as we've gone through this. But again, as I note, we've done our best to communicate with them, and I'm proud to note that the IBEW has joined our settlement agreement.
On a similar vein, why do you think it was ethical to push your employees to come to a council meeting during work hours to support the sale?
So, again, I asked Carlo this question at the last meeting. I said the topic of that particular meeting was municipalization. And as I noted, when it comes to talking about the acquisition, members of management and myself are the ones that are going to take the lead on it. But when it came to municipalization, that's something that impacts the employment of all of our employees. It's not, remember, the structures are different. Union contracts are different, and in some cases, they don't necessarily apply for a governmental entity. There's a lot of changes that occur, and as a result, we had a lot of employees who said that they wanted to speak on the particular issue and were opposed to municipalization because it changes the nature of their employment at an employer that's of choice in our region that they had many cases that either stayed in El Paso for or moved to El Paso for. And as a result, we said that if you were on a voluntary basis and work permitting, you were allowed to go and speak your mind. And I'm very proud that even some of our union workers off the clock showed up and were there. Our salaried workers, obviously, we tracked the time to make sure that people were there and it was work permitting. But again, that's something when you're on the topic of municipalization, that was something that our employees, I'm proud to say, were willing to speak up on.
Okay. Why did you remove the words community and sustainability from the previous agreement?
So there was, I guess, as you're looking at the text of certain agreements, I think this may have been just a second. There's nothing substantive with the change. Obviously, this Economic Development Fund is an attempt to make sure that our community is invested in, and that we do maintain and have the ability to engage in sustainable projects, and that's the Economic Development Fund that we're working with the city of El Paso on.
Why is El Paso Electric being sold? What prompted this sale? Is it for the best of El Paso Electric usage? So what prompted the sale of El Paso Electric?
As I noted, and I spoke about this earlier, the knock on the door. For those who have questions about it, please see the public filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission. It talks about a knock on the door and those obligations that you have as a corporation to be able, as a member of management or on the board of directors, to have to fulfill those, what they call them, fiduciary duties and fiduciary obligations, to make sure that you answer that door and to evaluate essentially what is actually the best interest of the company.
Okay. Is EP Electric's monopoly being transmitted? It should not. The franchise agreement should require EPE to sublet its grid to future competition. Is a new utility is allowed by the state to operate?
One of these things, and again, I note that we're heavily regulated. I talked about being a regulated company is a great thing. Austin dictates our structure in the state of Texas. And that's not necessarily dictated by the franchise. The franchise pertains to our use of the streets and public rights of way. With regard to the Public Utility Commission of Texas, we are the authorized electric utility to make sure that, and we are obligated to provide safe, reliable electric service in this part of Texas. New Mexico gives us the same authority with that part of New Mexico.
Okay. Will EPE grow in terms of employment opportunities?
And I meant to answer this question in our last meeting. I said, as any CEO of any company, I hope that we find opportunities for growth. We're obviously always mindful that we have to, maintain our books and records and maintain that a cost-effective electric service for customers. So as I know, this is something that as any member of management and as any investor, you're always hoping for those great growth opportunities in the right areas. But again, we're always balancing that against the needs and the affordability aspects for our customers.
Okay, and these three questions are on the same vein. So why is CPE planning to build a 160 million gas burning power plant? Why did you state that construction of a natural gas plant if you honestly intend to take us to renewables? Natural gas power plants consume extremely large amounts of water. How can you justify that in light of the benefits of solar and wind?
No, absolutely. I said we're moving toward integrating additional renewables into our system. You need to be able to support that intermittent resource with a resource that is consistent. And in that case, that's your natural gas resource. And we issued a request for proposals in 2017, an all-source request for proposals. We asked for people to say, what exactly can we do in order to maintain reliability here, to accommodate the growing needs of our customer base, and to also recognize that we've got aging, inefficient natural gas resources. As a result, this portfolio of resources is what we had to do in order to balance our grid, in order to have renewables, and in order to have natural gas where those renewables cannot provide sustainable service.
Why aren't EPE customers allowed to vote whether to be involved with a company with investments in oil and weapons? And there's the same question asked three different ways. Why aren't EPE customers allowed to vote before being forced into deal with a company that invests in oil and weapons? So the same question.
I think a key thing is to always recognize that the Paso Electric company is a private company. The shareholders have that control, and it's just the nature of the corporate business. Whether we like it or not, we can have a larger discussion about capitalism and that structure. But again, we're a small player in that structure. One thing to note is that voices are heard. As one, this doesn't happen in many other communities. Many other communities, when we had that slide up there, the Federal Trade Commission and shareholders vote, and that's it. That decision is over. In this instance, there have been many opportunities in many venues for people to have their voices heard and to have their voices heard through their elected representatives. One of those, again, Austin, where a number of parties and customer groups and state agencies that are dedicated to looking out for residential and small commercial customers was obligated to and participated. New Mexico, where the city of Las Cruces and Doña County were active participants. And again, the city of El Paso has been a very active participant, not just in Austin, but here in El Paso. And one thing to note, the fact that we're sitting and having these community meetings and at least conveying this information and answering as many questions as we can is something that doesn't happen in many of these acquisitions. So while there may not necessarily be an opportunity to vote, there's an opportunity to have the voices heard.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now for Carla, a couple of questions. Lightning round again. What is El Paso gaining from the sale of El Paso Electric, and what does it mean to the average person?
I stated this at the very beginning of when I spoke. You now have a guarantee that the headquarters will remain in El Paso for at least 10 years. That's not something that's currently provided. We have a commitment that the employment levels at El Paso Electric will not be impacted as a result of the transaction. You have the $21 million in rate credit. You also have a commitment for an $80 million economic development fund that we currently don't have, that will allow for the city to continue to grow, to attract more business and more employers to the community. What was the second question?
And what does it mean to the average consumer?
I mean, those are all gains to the community you didn't have before. Furthermore, because of the amendments to the franchise agreement, you also have the ability to keep the additional monies that were going to expire in 2030 that will allow us to continue to make additional improvements to the right of way. So those are all things that, to the average person, you didn't have before.
Okay, and then what is the projected gross franchise valuation by 2030 based on population, housing, industry, consumption, growth?
Yeah, I don't have those figures. We don't know what those figures look like.
Okay, the same, this was answered by reading everything as you're turning it in. Who pays the franchise fee? And when will the city of El Paso vote on the franchise agreement?
So the franchise fee is paid out of the gross revenues of the company. The company pays the city of El Paso the franchise fee, but it's based on the rates. And the city council will be voting on the franchise agreement on February 4th. It'll be heard on the 21st, and then there'll be another hearing on the 4th. So there's 2 opportunities to come to council.
Okay, thank you. Now for landing. And JP Morgan has been fined $410 million already for electricity rate manipulation. Why did IIF pick JP Morgan as its advisor?
Great question.
I think that they looked at the capabilities that existed, and again, these are investors that are looking at contractual revenues and regulated revenues, and it's something that's significantly different than the entities that you're talking about, and frankly, very separate from the entities you're talking about where they were fined.
Okay. Fracking is part of fossil fuel energy. Didn't you just say you don't frack?
I did.
So isn't it a lie?
I don't think so.
Okay. Why does
I want
IIF?
to be clear. IIF is not invested in any companies that are involved in exploration or production of any sort, and certainly not with fracking.
Okay. Why does IIF and JP Morgan change the answer of their relationship to different regulated agencies? Why should we trust, if you like, to these agencies? And it's the same question. Why did IIF deny affiliation with JP Morgan in a federal filing? Why should El Pasoans trust you?
So, I think the answer to your question is, we didn't change the answer. There were clarifications that were requested by FERC that we addressed. And again, it's an investment advisory relationship that is solely dedicated to the fund, and the owners of the fund are in fact the investors. And again, that's all encapsulated in the initial response that went to FERC. Their request was for clarifying questions, which we addressed. It was filed, and again, it's in the comment period now.
Why is JP Morgan the largest investor in the fossil fuel industry nationwide?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Will you explain why IIF sold Electricity Northwest? You already answered that one. Saying why did the credit rating of your last electric utility, Electricity Northwest, get a negative credit rating? I believe that was already answered.
Well, and again, that was related to the political volatility and the issues associated with the political climate in the UK.
Okay. Will a JP Morgan employee sit on the EPE board?
They will be a representative, again, at the Infrastructure Investment Group, the advisor that is dedicated to the investors of IIF.
Okay. Do any members of IIF's board benefit in any way from JP Morgan investment?
No.
Does IIF have any employees that are unaffiliated with JP Morgan?
I'm sorry, was that a question again?
Does IIF have any employees that are unaffiliated with JP Morgan?
IIF is the fund, and it is comprised of the 19 portfolio companies and the 9,000 employees that exist, and they are not affiliated with JP Morgan.
Okay. Your family of companies in the UK includes an electric utility. Why did you sell the company? I believe you had answered that before.
I have.
Will JP Morgan sit on the EPE board? You had answered that. Why have their 3 owners of Sun Jupiter failed to show their face to the community regulators?
So first of all, they're not the owners of Sun Jupiter. I'm going to say it again, the owners of Sun Jupiter are the investors. I think the reference that they're talking to is the general partner. And again, this is all disclosed in the filings. They are responsible for the equity investments that IIF makes, and have the jurisdiction over that equity amount.
And the same question in 2 different ways. How long will IIF own EPE? How many years will IIF stay in El Paso before making a return on their investment. What happens after the return is made? All our resources have been exploited by your company.
Is the last one a question?
Yeah, how long it will remain? How long will it remain?
So the intent is that we're going to be partners for a very, very long period of time. We've invested in the company, but also invested in the community through the Economic Development Fund. We're very excited to see how those funds are used to continue to attract new business and provide opportunities. Development is really a partnership with a utility and the community. I mean, as the community grows, the utility has the opportunity to grow, and certainly having a strong, vibrant utility is core in attracting new businesses to your region. So we intend to be partners with El Paso Electric for a very, very long period of time.
Okay, and again, it's a similarly worded to a question you answered already. JP Morgan has a history of being fined for market manipulation on the electric market in California and Michigan. How can we trust IIF when JP Morgan employees work for them?
I'm starting to sound like a broken record. IIF is owned by its investors, and the activities that you're talking about are not related to IIF. The group within JP Morgan is dedicated to this fund, and I want to make clear again, these are investments in long-term contracted or regulated assets. The kind of things that you're talking about there, back to the question about fracking, that's exploration and production. That's speculative. You're talking about electricity market trading and speculation. Again, these are not things that IIF invests in or is involved in.
Okay, and the same question asked two different ways. Is JP Morgan the top fossil fuel financier in the world? Isn't JP Morgan the #1 investor in fossil fuel? How many companies you are partnered with exploring fossil fuels?
The answer to the first couple of questions is I don't know, because again, my day-to-day is dedicated solely to the investors in IIF. And I'll reiterate the point before, there are no companies within IIF that are involved in exploration and production. We have distribution and transmission companies, and again, generation companies that do burn natural gas, but we're not involved in the creation, exploration, production, or fracking, to use the term, of natural gas.
Along the same lines, why did JP Morgan go on a Permian Basin bus tour in December?
I have no earthly idea.
Okay. Why has IIF failed to clearly answer how they expect to get their return on investment on two separate occasions to NMPRC?
I don't think that that's actually accurate.
Okay. If rates are to stay the same, how will IIF make back $4.3 billion in investment?
It's going to be in the dividends that are returned from the investment over time. Again, the way that a utility company operates is with rates that are approved by commissions, and they have a business plan of what happens going forward. All of the decisions that they make for capital are reviewed by these commissions. It was encapsulated in the plan that we had the opportunity to review. And again, this is a long-term investment where the return is going to be over a 20 to 30 year horizon, not an immediate. It is a long-term investment.
Okay. And why did water rates go up so much the year after IIF purchased Southwest Water in Texas and became a focal point of Texas Senate hearings in 2011?
I'm not aware that they went up in Texas. I'm aware of the situation in Alabama.
Okay.
I think we talked about that.
Explain how is it that you are employed by JP Morgan but don't work for JP Morgan?
Again, the Infrastructure Investment Group is solely dedicated as the investment advisor for this fund. So we don't have any dealings with JP Morgan. It is solely dedicated to this strategy.
Okay, thank you, Landy. I think the rest of the questions are for Adrian.
Before you ask a question, I think there's one thing that people in this room can all agree on, and that's to thank the 10 language interpreters I've been watching them for and I really do appreciate it.
climate change, why did they attempt to tax solar in the past?
As we've noted, these are issues that go up in rate reviews at the Public Utility Commission of Texas. We need to make sure that we recover costs, and as costs and power is going two ways on a grid that was built for power to go one way, you have to recover the costs and make sure that they're not then borne by customers who do not have solar. And as a result, that's why it's a cost-based business. And as a result, that's why that was then agreed to by all the parties that participated in the PUCT and then was subsequently approved by the PUCT.
You say you need IIF for solar expertise. El Paso already has substantial solar expertise. Why have you failed to utilize for so many years?
One of the key things is that we're looking at this in the form of utility scale solar. And this is something that is being integrated on in different utilities around the country. We've been moving in that direction. And again, we can all have this, debates about whether it's fast enough, but we're always constrained by the cost-based business that we have to operate in, as regulated in Santa Fe and as regulated in Austin. And as a result, now we have at least a partner that has done things on large utility scale and has also figured out how to integrate large utility scale renewable resources with various utilities and different grids, who can then help us assess what works and what doesn't as we try to move in that direction.
Why are you not building several level 3 DC fast car chargers in El Paso?
We talked a bit about that, and again, it goes back to a lot of what we're authorized to do in Austin and Santa Fe. And while that obviously sounds creative, and I'd like to see more of those, obviously, in our service territory, it's not necessarily something that we can do, but obviously we'd be happy to take a look at that and see if it's something that we could possibly do, and it's a creative option that might be allowed by one of our regulators.
What is your vision for EPE for the next 10, 20, 50 years?
That's great, and it's to continue to be headquartered here in El Paso, Texas. To have the employees that we have, the great talents that we have. We've got employees who are not only an employer of choice among people who grew up and live in El Paso, but who people who want to come to El Paso. So that's the vision that I want to see. I want us to just continue in that and to be able to be part of the change in technology as it starts to move and becomes affordable, recognizing the socioeconomic status of our region.
Why is a regulated monopoly a good thing?
Talked a bit about that.
Yes.
I like the regulated monopoly. It's great. Regulation is great. Awesome.
Why is EPE worth $4.3 billion to IIF JP Morgan?
One of the items that I noted is we have stock and we have debt. And when you look at as companies knocked on the door and talked about our equity, IIF ended up stating that they were willing to provide $68.25 per share of the equity portion. We have debt that is outstanding, and as a result, when you combine those two together, you end up with $4.3 billion. So that's why you end up with a $4.3 billion total equity plus debt.
Okay, the Office of Public Counsel of the State Public Utilities Commission raised a question in their filing about how to balance the interest of stockholders in a monopoly corporation with the interest of ratepayers, customers. Please comment on the balance in the interest of transparency. How will we, the customers, know about the balance you forged?
One of the great things, again, as I noted, is that the things that happened to us today, regulation at PUCT in the city of El Paso, still continues. And so those are opportunities as we go in for our certificates of convenience and necessity, as we go in for rate reviews. These are all things where people at the Office of Public Utility Counsel especially is going to be a participant. And Public Utility Commission staff is obligated and will always be a participant to assess the balance between those sometimes conflicting issues.
In the pending negotiations, several different interests are represented among the parties. Who represents the interests of regular residential ratepayers?
As I noted, the City of El Paso is an active participant. The Office of Public Utility Counsel and the Public Utility Commission staff participates, as well as specific customer groups. One of those was, again, as we discussed earlier, that Rate 41 group of public authorities.
Were there other potential EPE buyers besides IIF? If so, who are they?
One of the items to note, and you can see this in the publicly filed document with the Securities and Exchange Commission, to see how the process moved forward and to discuss as much public information as can be done. Again, we're subject to a lot of the federal laws pertaining it is publicly available in the Securities and Exchange Commission filings as much as we can.
And you said Rate 41 is not being addressed because this is not a rate case. Why isn't it being included as part of the franchise agreement to ensure that public entities are protected from higher electric rates? for public entities that will result in higher property taxes. This is of great concern.
So remember, we talked earlier about the franchise agreement being obtained for the use of the public rights of way for the city. Rates and structures from residential customer classes to large commercial customer classes to that rate 41 group of public authorities is something that is done in a different proceeding at the state of Texas, and the same thing in New Mexico. So that the issue is that they're different proceedings and serve different purposes.
What kind of deal would the homeowner who invests in solar energy have?
I'm sorry, say that one again.
What kind of deal would the homeowner who invests in solar energy have?
Again, a lot of that, as it pertains to our interaction with them, is governed by state law and governed by our interactions and state regulation.
This again might have been answered already. Why is the commitment to keep EPE in El Paso for only 10 years? Why are you only committing to not cutting jobs for 5 years?
And as again, as we discussed, we were looking for the ones that were the largest and is required to be stated in Texas and New Mexico. Obviously, we're looking forward to a very long relationship, especially when you consider that many of the other commitments that IIF has provided as part of this deal with our community extend well beyond that time period, as well as in New Mexico, beyond any of the 10-year periods that are listed.
If this agreement is in the public interest, how will this directly affect the consumer? Will rates go up? If not, how will you make sure it stays that way?
Again, the rate review process in Texas and New Mexico are always going to continue. None of that changes. We are still regulated, and our rates are still regulated. The city of El Paso and OPUC and PUC staff are active participants.
Okay. What will occur to the retirees' paychecks when the company is sold? There has been no information on that so far.
Okay, one thing, and we've discussed this along the lines of pension, and we've talked about these questions before, is that as a result of this transaction, pensions do not change. There are still federal laws that apply to the protection of pensions and benefits.
Per kilowatt hour, please quantify your range of feed-in tariff rates to consumers, to commercial, to industrial solar producers.
Unfortunately, I cannot provide that information off the top of my head, but as much of it is publicly available is available on our website. And again, a lot of this information is also filed with our regulators. So unfortunately, I'm sorry, I don't know
The
the
per
per
kilowatt
kilowatt
hour.
hour
Okay.
rates off the top of my head. The tariffs are available online though.
How can you guarantee that EPE will not be split into generation and transmission? Are there protections?
So one of the things to note is that much of this is dictated by our state regulators. And for folks that were longtime employees of the company may remember that back in the 90s, Texas was looking at this portion of the state and was talking about that state law was going to require a change to the corporate structure. That didn't end up happening. And so again, much of this is dictated by state law. And that ended up not happening. They ended up not applying that to this portion of the country.
And same question, how can we guarantee the company will not be split into generation and transmission? Why, despite being the 10th sunniest city in the world, does EPE use less than 3% of its electricity from the sun and building a 160 million gas burning power plant?
So again, the Smart Electric Power Alliance is actually one of the really great organizations that looks at the proliferation of solar around the country. And El Paso Electric Company is actually one of the top third utilities that has integrated solar. So yes, well, that number of megawatts seems low, and it is actually, as the country and as utilities are moving in this direction, commensurate with their state laws and the applicable federal laws, we're actually in the top third.
Okay. And then my greatest concern is that EPE is going from an expensive service utility to an investment utility where the emphasis is for shareholders, not the users. Can you comment on that?
Yes. Every day, I have to think about the next quarter. Our chief financial officer thinks about things on a quarter-by-quarter basis. We obviously have an obligation to serve, and we will always put our customers and making sure the reliability and safety of the system and safety for our employees is first. But one thing that you have when you're a company on the New York Stock Exchange is you have to think quarter by quarter by quarter by quarter. And that's not the way that infrastructure funds operate. Infrastructure funds have a longer time horizon. And as a result, you can actually engage in planning in a much longer fashion. You're not thinking, how is this going to look on my next set of books that are due in 3 months? You're going to think to yourself, does this make sense long term? And now that pressure is no longer focused on you. And that's what we're really excited about and looking forward to working on that.
Okay. This question by maybe Carlos can also answer together. It says, has Sonetics made any commitment to El Paso Renewables in the legal terms of the proposed sale?
No. I mean, yeah, and one of the reasons for that is we talked a bit about this earlier. Sonetics is, well, I'll be able to, and on our team, we'll be able to get resources and understand this much more. We have these requirements that they would, Sonetics, if it ever were to consider responding to a bid process. And that's, again, just a good business practice that Austin and Santa Fe and Washington impose.
And by the way, Sonetics is also looking to learn from El Paso Electric. I think this is a two-way relation. Sonetics doesn't own transmission, so there are things that we can learn from El Paso, and vice versa. We can provide expertise in solar, batteries, and how to bring those systems into the grid.
And are you Venezuelan American?
Huh?
It says, are you Venezuelan American? Or
Nope. I grew up in Venezuela. I dropped out from college. I did 1 day of law in the Universidad Católica in Venezuela. I lived in Venezuela until I was 29 years old. And I left Venezuela for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I'm Mexican.
In the 1990s, and we're almost done. It's almost like 7 o'clock, right? In the 1990s, the World Bank pushed for the privatization of many utility companies. It did not work. Prices went up, maintenance went down. It was for poor areas. It was not for poor areas. Government could not control great companies. How is this going to be different in El Paso?
So again, as I noted, we've been a private company since 1901. A lot of the demands and the structures of our company, I think we've been a good community partner for 120 years. I think our employees are a good testament to that. Whether with our union folks on the front lines dealing with the poles, wires, and generation plants, no matter what the temperature is outside, to our customer care representatives who are taking calls 24 hours a day. I think that these are things that we have done as a private company that have shown a commitment to El Paso, and with infrastructure and investment fund, we're going to be able to continue that commitment to El Paso.
It says, does this deal encompass not only our electric grid energy powered by coal, but also our water, our natural gas distributor, don't understand the handwriting, and wind power from Novartis Energy?
A couple of items on that. This just entails El Paso Electric Company. Your natural gas service is provided by Texas Gas Service, headquartered in Oklahoma. The El Paso Water Utility is a department of the city under the Public Service Board. This just pertains to El Paso Electric Company, headquartered in El Paso, Texas. With regard to Novartis, this does not involve, Novartis is one of the portfolio companies, but again, there's another partner company that we'll be able to pick up the phone and get some information from. We have nothing to do with Novartis, we're a separate entity.
Okay. This is this deal requires both state of Texas and federal regulators. True or false?
True. Santa Fe, Austin, and Washington, and of course the city of El Paso will all have to say in this. And again, those interests from interveners have all been represented in each of those venues.
This one seems to be for Landy, but it says you're entering the energy markets after many years of being fined more than $400 million for manipulating energy markets. True or false?
False.
Okay.
Again, this fund does not get involved in speculative trading, does not get involved in anything to do with the electric markets. It is core infrastructure services. Full stop.
Okay. Repeating again the question you had answered. What are the three owners? Rita, Celis, Chris, Ward, Dennis, Clark.
Owners of the general partner. We discussed that earlier.
Yes. Does IIF have any employees that are unaffiliated with JP Morgan? I'm just reading all of them in the interest of transparency, but they're the same question written in different ways. I'm sorry for that. Does IIF have any employees that are unaffiliated with JP Morgan? Do any member of IIF board benefit in any way from JP Morgan's investment? Why is JP Morgan the largest investor in fossil fuel industry? So those have been asked and answered. Why did Encore go bankrupt after being sold to a fund like IIF?
It actually didn't. A little bit earlier. So the bankruptcy that is being referred to was Texas Competitive Energy Holdings. It was basically off the sale of TXU, and it was at a time where they were making multiple investments. They had announced 11 coal plants at the time that they were doing the transaction, and it was, if I remember correctly, roughly $38 billion of debt was taken out for that transaction. The interesting thing about it is that as part of the transaction, the Public Utility Commission of Texas put in ring fencing provisions. These are financial protections to basically insulate the utility company from any activities that happen outside of the utility company. So yes, Texas Competitive Energy Holdings went bankrupt, but Encore did not. Encore was protected. It was taken outside of the bankruptcy. And part of the process that we went through and what a lot of the interveners and frankly the city were looking at were the protections that Encore benefited from and making sure that those existed in the transaction. So the transaction that we're doing with El Paso Electric. So when the reference to the regulatory commitments or the ring fencing provisions or a lot of different ways that it's discussed in what is in a stipulated settlement, these are the same protections that existed in the Encore process that protected Encore to provide that extra level of security in this transaction.
Will IIF commit to no new non-solar power plants?
I'm sorry?
Will IIF commit to no new non-solar power plants?
So I think we've said a number of times, and frankly it's embodied in the regulatory commitments, that the management team of El Paso Electric is going to maintain the independent operations day-to-day of the company. They are responsible for making the decisions around what's best for their portfolio, what generation resources they need, and how to best serve their customers. It has to be done safely, reliably, affordably, and they will continue to do that. And that will be part of the process where they'll be making recommendations. We are moving forward with a renewable study that is going to take a look at the region, look at the capabilities that exist here, and what can be done as far as investing in renewables and making that transition into that renewable economy. But there are restrictions that exist. There are rules that exist at the state level, as well as regulations that happen at the PUC that aren't necessarily as friendly to renewables. They're looking at it as a least cost alternative. And so there are some policy shifts, and part of that renewable study is going to be taking a look at what policy shifts and legislative solutions are going to need to be promulgated so that the company can move ahead with those renewable investments.
Why can't IIF Sonetics simply buy land in El Paso to create solar farms? And is there an expectation that through the public utilities, it will make it easier and cheaper, if not free, to acquire the land?
Absolutely not. These again there are very strong affiliate standards that exist in Texas, and then again are embodied in the regulatory commitments. That is what is happening here. Sonetics, Carlos is here. He is representing the investors and what it is like to be part of that IIF family. But make no mistake, El Paso Electric is going to be responsible for the decisions that they make in what they do for their generation system and how they grow their portfolio. There are very strong affiliate standards. This is not a situation that gives anybody a leg up. And all of these transactions will be done at an arm's length basis. So, unless there are landowners that are willing to give away land for free in El Paso, which I'm pretty sure there aren't, I don't see any benefit in that.
Why would IIF be a good strategic partner for this community?
I think we've talked about it a number of times. We're making an investment in the utility, but we're making an investment in the community. We're a long-term investor. We've been asked multiple times, what does this mean? How do the investors make the return? The investors make the return by ensuring that the utility is providing that safe, reliable, affordable electric service. The investors will benefit over a very, very long period of time, a 20 to 30-year horizon, and that gives you a partner in the city. We've made the commitments around keeping the headquarters here. So to be very clear and very succinct about it, headquarters are staying in El Paso. Your largest employer is staying in El Paso. You're going to have a partner in economic development. All right, you're going to have complete alignment, because the only way that the investors are going to win is if the customers of El Paso Electric win. And as Adrian said earlier, this is not measured on a quarter-to-quarter basis, and this is going to give a lot more flexibility for the way that the electric company thinks about serving its customer, and some of the challenges that have been talked about today around sustainability, around climate change, around the renewable transition. These aren't necessarily things that can be done strategically when you're trying to manage your books on a quarter-to-quarter basis. So having the flexibility to think about what's right for the community on a long-term basis, having the investment capital to do it and to execute about it, and getting the commitments to make sure that this is happening in this community, those are the benefits that you're getting.
Okay, thank you. And for the people presenting, how much do they each stand to earn from this sale? I'm a salaried employee, so it's going to be the same after as it was before. Okay. Okay, thank you, Landy.
Yeah.
Now the next set of questions are for Carla. Repeating, the ratepayers, not EPE, pay the franchise fee, correct?
Yes, it's a pass-through fee.
Okay. Why are San Francisco, New York City, Chicago, Boulder, Pueblo, all of Maine looking to rid their investor-owned utility and municipalize, yet El Paso fails to do its feasibility studies?
The city of El Paso is committed to doing a feasibility study. Council has directed the city manager and myself to do that. You'll see an item to discuss how we're proposing to put that together at the next city council meeting.
Again, the ratepayers pay the franchise fee, correct?
Yes.
Can we municipalize if the franchise is transferred to JP Morgan?
Those are two different subjects. Municipalization is us buying the utility, and the franchise would belong to whoever pays the franchise. So it's two separate questions.
Can we kill the sale?
If the city of El Paso votes to not transfer the franchise, the deal falls apart, but so does the commitment to the community and the jobs and the headquarters and the maintenance of the right-of-way and the $80 million in investment in economic development. So it's a bigger loss.
Next to last question, why the opponents to this deal think that the city of El Paso would do a better job than the current management team of EPE to run an electric utility?
I think that's a question that needs to be considered at the feasibility stage, right? Is the city of El Paso and its current management and structure fit to run a utility company? And that's something that the taxpayers should be considering as well. We're having those conversations.
Okay, thank you. The last two questions are for me. Why are you censoring us? And why can the public ask the questions themselves? As you notice, once the disruptions ended, we were able to answer over 200 questions in a short amount of time. This is a process that has been put in place in many other communities. We are not attempting to censor you. I read exactly what you wrote. Sometimes I could barely read your handwriting, but I wrote it. Where are they? Okay, and so you can speak to them directly. After the session is over, you can ask whatever questions there remain. So there is no censorship. I have all the questions here. All of them were read. There's a gentleman back there with a camera phone, and he can attest to the fact that everything was read. All the questions, repeated and unrepeated, are here. So why did we choose this process? Why did I propose this process to Paso Electric, to the city, to IIF? In order to foster a quick, efficient way to do this, we only had 2 community meetings and the time was limited. And so we had to get through a number of questions quickly, and in a way that didn't make our presenters into piñatas. Honestly, we need to show decorum and respect, and sometimes the dialogue devolves into a screaming match that's not productive for anybody. And so to that end, I thank you for your patience in dealing with the disruptions, and I appreciate the fact that you asked all of those questions and that to our presenters that they were able to answer. If you still have questions that haven't been answered, please feel free to approach them. They are here for a reason. You had that opportunity on Tuesday. Many of the folks that were escorted out were given that opportunity and they did not take it at the time. They chose to disrupt the process and we chose to not allow them to do that because we need as many points of view represented from as many points of view of the citizenry here. So again, I thank you for the process. We're concluding the question and answer portion. At this time, if you wish to address, Adrian, Landy, Carla will be here for your questions. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna go ask my question.
I'm gonna hover. Good idea. Yeah. That's what I'm here for.
So, what you said about how you are thinking about things would be great if you were everybody on the board of El Paso Electric felt like you, but they don't. And the board of IIF doesn't feel like you. You said you need meat. That's the theme of the conference. That's the theme for the investors. All right, you have all these investors that use. You have 500 pension funds, right? And you have all of these passive investors, right? If a person has a pension with one of these pension funds, that person is not going to vote a proxy, like if you own a share stock in a company, you can vote a proxy. But if you have a pension
Bad for an Android.
fund, you don't
not bad
get
for an Android.
right? So all this comes together, and all these pension funds come together to IIF. And then the people who are running IIF, which are smart people, are managing the funds of IIF on behalf of the investors. But the view of how they're going to make money for their is not coming from that broad base of people. It's coming from a very small number of people who get to sit on the boards of your company and all the other companies.
But I want to also
Yes.
There's both sides.
When you say the investors, you don't mean a pension holder, you mean the fund. Right? Yes. The investment officers of those pension funds.
Nice to meet you.
My daughter Jessica, you but we are all. I think El Paso Electric is very progressive, and in their opinions about future energy efficient technology, try to work with them. And I think this IIF fund is trying to do that in the long term. It's fun to find somebody not just quarter to quarter basis, but you know, to finance, you just doing this quarter to quarter treadmill all the time. And it's a good thing to have people that can invest in the community long term. They have even like Mr. they are in the top third of electric utilities in the country. So let's just expand that. I just want to make sure because that gentleman I just want to hear what you're saying, Mike. There is both sides. I know, and this is what you can listen to. I remember why you asked the question. Sarah. Because I got right here. That one's so cute.
The other one that is very big
I have them all.
Then you get the all-wheel or you get the those are companies that invest.
I got the twisted driving. So it's below 40. I got the brace. I got the gray.
You got the gray. I want the black with the white ones.
I have the black.
I keep on going and throwing it out and not looking back. I don't have the money for it.
One of these days, what you guys do is you
Well, the business,
and then you're gonna
things going to happen, and we're going to have to take out prices.
you do it.
Yeah, it's really a cool
You will not regret it. I mean,
We're based
I
in
got
the
it
United
since last
States.
night, and I got so many.
In Miami.
Parked in the garage.
So, all right. So part of the business. My name is Howard. Howard.
There's a new
Do you have the supercharge, like the quick charge?
Of all the people that El Paso Electric brought here, and all the people that I have, you're the only one that I would even begin testing.
I want to try it. Yeah. I need to try it. Just
The
to see
thing is,
what
J.P. Morgan was fined $410 million for energy manipulation. J.P. Morgan, as an investment bank, has invested more money than any other investment bank in the fossil fuel industry since the Paris Climate Accord. Now, I'm talking about since Paris. Right? So I'm not talking about over 10 years. I'm talking about just the last 3 years, J.P. Morgan has invested into fossil fuels since the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, why your company would choose J.P. Morgan over Goldman Sachs or any number of other organizations is what I'm trying to find out. Because when you talk about ESG, when you talk about the U.S., when you talk about socially responsible investment and impact investment and all the things we've been talking about for 40 years on this, J.P. Morgan does not rank very high among investment banks for visionary. And in fact, they have a very strong vested interest in the transition being slowed down because they have such a large investment in fossil fuels. Okay? Now, it's true that IIF, which is one little piece of the JP Morgan umbrella, happens to have a renewable focus. But overall, JP Morgan does not have a strong renewable focus. Overall, JP Morgan has a very strong fossil fuel focus.
Great.
All right?
Great. I'm glad to hear that is great because our rates would be outrageous. That's what he was talking about. Today would be seen on that.
I just hijacked. You just hijacked my.
Well, let me ask a joke question. You do ask me why. Okay, let me tell you.
And by the way, if you're saying that the rates would be outrageous, you would agree with me that PV costs have come down 400 to 1 since the 1970s. I started being involved with photovoltaics when I worked for NASA in the 1970s. Okay? I worked for NASA Ames on atmospheric modeling starting in 1978. I left El Paso and went. Yeah, so James Hansen became the head of an organization that I collaborated with NASA GISS, right? Goddard Institute, when I was working for NASA Ames on designing the world's fastest supercomputer. And the benchmark for that supercomputer was the Navier-Stokes equation, computational fluid dynamics. And I worked with people from the Goddard Institute to actually get their algorithms, okay? Right. So I've been involved with atmospheric modeling, climate, solar, renewables since more than 40 years ago. Right? And I think you'd agree with me that if prices have come down 400 to 1, so our rates would go down the more renewables, especially solar, we have, because the cost of PV is now lower than the cost of even natural gas today. Right? You'd agree with me on that. Yeah, but in El Paso we have more sun hours. We have 6.75 sun hours. We're the number one on the Yeah. So she's saying that her rates would go up and she's wrong because her rates would go down the higher the solar proportion is. And you know that, and I know that, and Peter luckily knows that. Now the point is, what we've, if everybody from IIF and JP Morgan thought like you, it would be one thing. But unfortunately, that's not the situation that we have right now. And if the utility was municipalized, the municipal utility could also ask your company to come in and build solar farms, but we would have many, many other vendors who would also, we got a lot of land here, a lot of solar. We need to get the transmission lines worked out here so that we can export our our solar production out of here. So you're the only person out of all the people that El Paso Electric brought today that I would even trust at all. Okay? So, but I do need to talk to some of the other people that Peter wants to talk to, that we're going to talk to. But the thing is, I just want to thank you for coming to El Paso.
You asked me a question,
and I want to hear the answer, and then we'll let this woman hear.
And the reason is even that is JP Morgan, this is a completely independent group.
Completely independent. Never completely independent.
The thing is, at that point in time, we were looking for a partner who also understands energy.
Well, that is important, yes.
We look over 50, 60 companies.
So, for example, let's take one that's not exactly a wonder, certainly not an angel, but certainly has a higher, better track record than JP. Let's take. Why did you not go with Goldman Sachs for infrastructure?
Their funds were not the representatives. The big thing for us with a higher, and we're not choosing JP Morgan, we're choosing IIF. It's completely different.
Okay, so I'm not saying I'm going to agree, but I'm saying what you're telling me is that you chose IIF despite having anything to
I know he goes, he's broke down all the rules.
And how long have you been with IIF?
Do you want to talk to
Hi, nice to meet you, Carla.
2013.
Of the agreement, it took us include any clause. I've heard a lot of have a say in is there any opportunity to clauses in the agreement, any particular in terms of what requirements from yes, in terms of how many people from El Paso
I would have a lot of
So we did include language in the contracts that would require that they do the renewable study. And there was a lot of conversation and a lot of requests to say you need to commit to a number or a percentage. And they told them, look, we wouldn't even be able to commit to a period. We don't even know where to begin and the cost of the start. So we want to start with a study to say how do you get this to El Paso and what type of infrastructure needs to come. So what they committed to do is that we will do the study. And then once we have the study, we will work toward establishing the thing. So that's in the franchise agreement. They've committed to doing that study. We did have the opportunity, and that is in the PUC, the requirement on the number of directors that are from El Paso is in the...
Hey, how you doing? I'm good. We ain't met before. Yeah.
And welcome to El Paso. I just want to say one thing.
To be on the board of directors. So that is a requirement. And then to tell back
the boundaries of some of the long-term environmental and social organizations actually
that's just
I mean, it's great that props to you there, but I think you would also end up in
sometimes when you never have dispatch spot, but of course.
They couldn't get it done in less than a year, and they wanted to close their deal by the middle of the summer. So at this point, we've done as much as we could to get the purchase agreement, and council needs to decide by February. Is it going to help us get more out of the we were able to get as much as we did because we were working.
Well, I hope so. Let's see how this all works out.
So I can show you that we talked about how much we could get.
I'm good. I'm good. I'm all
They have committed to putting that they have to report twice a year. That's in the franchise.
Let's make it happen.
Give us a study, and we have to work together to get the results.
So are you still on the police?
So I think we anticipate seeing a change in how they approach
And is that done by a third party?
They haven't explained to us, but they're going to put it out for bid it, and it'll cost a third party and they'll see it.
The last thing is yes, that's going to change. For a third party to carry on.
I think it will be a third party now. That's the attorney the city does. So they'll hire somebody.
That actually is not here.
Well, they'll have to bid it. Third party agreement talk about whenever they review for services, they have to bid it out. So if somebody in the private world asks them to work for it, that's a different thing.
Like a battery storage, your own technology at home. The battery has a limited amount before it starts to degrade.
Where'd you get the batteries?
There's suppliers that have them, and we're actually working with them.
Have you ever considered like a Tesla battery?
Those are on the smaller scale. Those are mostly for customers. We're looking at utility scale larger.
And how do the batteries look? I mean, obviously,
I actually don't know.
Huge, like AAA battery that's in the center.
Totally good question. I'm learning that one too because we're learning how to bring batteries in the system. But again, those are a newer technology on the utility scale.
How will this help to the transition to solar panels?
So we're actually, remember, as we're adding solar onto our system.
So the batteries will get from the solar?
No, some of them will, and others will have to be charged on from our own grid. So there's through the natural gas or nuclear. We also have nuclear.
Do we have?
But we do not have coal. You have nuclear. Yeah. It comes in from Arizona. So one key thing, there are other utilities around the country that had coal and still have coal. We got out of coal in 2016. We do not generate power.
How long do you think it'll be until we're fully, that's like the idealistic, perfect scenario where it's 100% sun, but how close are we to getting like the most energy?
I actually don't know. I've seen people talk about it in terms of decades, 40, 50 years. But I don't have a good answer.
Do you guys?
You can hold it behind you in my car.
Just continues on, okay?
So let me explain what I want to you believe the franchise agreement will remain because they
It will
have to
remain.
pay us.
It will remain.
So under the terms of the franchise agreement, as
The
it
old
exists,
one, yes.
the old one is the one that expired in 2004.
And then there's another one.
Current one.
Yes, the current
The
one.
current
Yes.
one.
Not well, to me, the old is the one that's in, all right, so there's three. There's 2004 before that, there's from then till now, and the one that's current will continue unless there's a sale and unless the franchise is transferred. So the current one just continues. Okay?
Right. So then, at the time that, under the terms of the current franchise, specifies that if the city does not consent to the assignment, the franchise terminates.
If that happens, who loses? The city can give that franchise to anybody else, because it's if the franchise agreement terminates, the city gets everything back, and this El Paso Electric loses everything. In other words, if the franchise terminates, it's not bad for the city. It might be a little bit of a blip, but the thing is, El Paso Electric goes out of business because it has no ability to use the rights of way. All of its
Well, it would keep operating. It just wouldn't pay the city the $25 million.
No. It wouldn't have the franchise. It can't operate without the franchise. If you violate the rules of your McDonald's franchise, or I'm a licensor, so franchising and licensing are very similar. If the licensor and the licensee, their contract goes out of force, the licensor takes back everything that they've granted, and they still own it, and they can license it to anybody else. And the licensee loses everything if they can't maintain it. So El Paso Electric will lose everything. That means that the city has all this infrastructure on its own right-of-way that the El Paso Electric has no right to operate. The city gains everything. It's not bad for the city for the franchise agreement to be over. So that term needs to be interpreted as not bad for the city. It's not like you lose $25 million. It's that you can say, okay, as of such and such a date, this franchise is terminating. We, the city of El Paso, now either municipalize the utility or we open up for bids. We're going to, nationwide, we're going to let anybody who wants to operate this infrastructure come in. But the point is, El Paso Electric won't let that happen because they go out of business because El Paso City is the biggest part of their service territory. And they're not going to be able to make enough money to keep all their people employed and pay their debt if they only are making money from Van Horn and Hatch and, these miscellaneous and out in the county and so on. The city of El Paso is their biggest source of revenue. If they lose the franchise to operate in the city of El Paso, it's done for them. In terms of negotiating leverage, the city has all the cards, and El Paso Electric does not. And that needs to be understood so that we can understand what's going on here.
I understand.
Okay, all right, now, let's take a look.
Is that accurate, or?
It's an argument to make, but I don't believe it's accurate.
What?
I would say, I'm saying
that was owned by a private entity, then we would be subject to a lawsuit because there's all this stuff that belongs to them that we now say it's up for sale. And then you forget about the state and the regulatory requirements.
Can they operate without a franchise agreement?
No, they cannot. Absolutely cannot.
They operate without a franchise.
No, that's no. I have a question. That's not accurate. The franchise agreement is the essence of a franchise at all. In any case, a license for a franchise is the grantor is in control. They have an asset, and the asset is not transferred. It is only allowed to be used under the terms of the franchise. So there is no way that the city can lose its ability to grant that franchise. El Paso Electric would never, ever allow it to get to that point. They would never allow it.
What are you proposing to do?
First, you tell Peter that I'm right. That's what I propose.
No, I'm not going to say that.
Right. Then we have to have a meeting. I asked Peter back in before the end of the year. And now we're having the conversation. So I asked Peter, I need to see this in writing, because what's happened is you and other people in the legal firm have caused the city council people to have fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Because this is the essence, this is at the very, very core of the whole conversation, is that they are afraid of something. They don't need to be afraid. In fact, they need to understand that they have all the cards. And once that happens, this whole conversation will be changed. For example, if the city were to say, we're not going to make a decision about IIF for 6 months while we do the study. Guess what? IIF is either going to walk away or not. But the city won't lose anything at all. The El Paso Electric would have to negotiate further with the city. That's the way it is, right? So we have to get down to understanding the legal structure. Okay, we have to have a meeting to discuss.
Can I speak? Is that allowed to speak? Yeah. You are represented by whatever representative on council. Work for democracy. You should come and speak to council about what you're proposing.
3 minutes. I can't fit it into 3 minutes.
I don't provide legal advice or recommendations to the public. I recommend to the body. So all I'm saying, but he's a member of the body. I report to all my clients and I do what they direct me to. So while I hear and I do understand what you're saying, those are decisions that have long-lasting implications that we don't have time to deal with, that we have spoken, and I have spoken to my client, which Representative Schwarzman has to be one message. So I would encourage you to continue to come and speak to council and speak to the subject. And
3 minutes at a time doesn't work for this.
Okay,
And that doesn't work.
And you can write in, you can write into the members of council and let them see what it is that you are proposing. And that's the opportunity you have.
There's got to be some better way. I mean, 3 minutes 1 week, 3 minutes another week, and all this is not working.
Schedule a meeting in the office to talk about
us, and also.
No, I'm not going to come and give you legal advice. I've spoken to them about the ramifications of their decision. You have
But if the legal advice is not correct,
this question's more about the interpretation.
I'm saying that the legal interpretation is not correct. And I'm saying that this.
Sir, do you have a law degree? Do you practice law in Texas?
I do not
I would recommend you not practice law.
It doesn't. That's.
And we've hired many lawyers and we've hired many experts. And I understand.
So what I need to do, what I need
You
then.
don't need to convince people. You need to convince your elected representatives.
Well, we have a written legal opinion on this subject. Because this is the core. This question is the core. And unless we have a written legal agreement, a legal interpretation, I mean, what I've expressed to you, all right, and I have still, even after we have this conversation, I have still not heard any legal argument that invalidates what I'm saying. That the city as a licensor, as a franchisor, has all the cards if the franchise agreement were to come to an end. And if you're saying that's not true, I need to see a legal.
I don't represent my clients.
But I'm a citizen. I'm a citizen.
But I'm not permitted to divulge confidential and I provide them legal advice behind closed doors when they make decisions. I'm not permitted to divulge that information to the public. That is protected communication between the city attorney's office and the body of the council.
What's your job?
I am the city attorney.
You're the city. What is that?
I am the legal representative for the city of Paso.
So,
I'm the lawyer.
oh, okay.
I'm the lawyer.
And so, get voted on or recommended, but
No, those are appointed positions, so we have to hire city managers.
so the document that you supply to the city council saying these are the ramifications of what would happen if the franchise agreement were to come to an end. You supplied a formal opinion to the city council for that.
That information is communicated.
Because really,
I'm going to have to get going in a minute, but what was the question you asked?
Legal recommendation.
well, a legal opinion on this particular matter that we're talking about right now, right, a legal opinion where your office says to the city council, we believe that this is the interpretation that is correct. All right, and you said you had provided an executive session. You know, so we're kind of, so the thing is, yeah. So basically, I have, including this conversation, I have never yet heard any argument that comes anywhere close to substantiating the point. I did ask a few questions. You answered them today, but you didn't answer them because the 25 million will continue because there is no way that the 25 million is going to stop unless the franchise agreement comes to an end and El Paso Electric walks away from it and it stops providing electricity in El Paso. Any organization that was going to provide electricity in El Paso City is going to pay at least that 25 million because no one's going to have the right to sell electricity in El Paso City without the city granting a franchise. That's clear, simple, direct, and that must be addressed before this transaction can occur. That has to be addressed before any decisions about it can occur. And to say that it's attorney-client privilege between your office and your client, which is my representative, and the city's citizens of El Paso, our elected representatives employ you to give good legal advice to our side, our city. So to say that it's confidential begs a question here that has to be answered before this can go forward. And it is a rather huge scandal if we do not get to the bottom of this and a decision is made that would expedite an agreement and a transfer of the franchise. Now, to be very, very clear here, the provision in the current existing franchise agreement that says that the agreement comes to an end if there is not a transfer would only happen if the sale is rejected by El Paso, and El Paso City rejecting it would cause the sale to not happen. If the sale doesn't happen, everything continues just as it is now. If El Paso Electric goes to court and says, according to the provision, the franchise is null and void, they must cease providing electricity, billing the customers. They just can't do it. So it's not something to be afraid of. It's not something that has anything to do with negotiation. It's not something that could ever occur. It won't occur. So to make the decision based on the fear that that would happen deprives us of very important rights. Now, if this is a good investment for IIF to make, it is also a good investment for others to make because investors don't invest, right? And the city of El Paso, together with the county of El Paso and the entire service area, has enough ability to finance a transaction like this in a municipalization that would be, not only the city of El Paso, but the entire service area could take over this utility. Furthermore, the franchise agreement is a big part of the 4.3 market value of the company because the company has nothing like that market value unless it has the franchise agreement. Like if you sold your McDonald's franchise but McDonald's has revoked your franchise contract, you're not going to sell your McDonald's, right? The 4.3 billion must have subtracted from that number a large amount for the value of the franchise. So the very first question I asked at the very first minute of coming to the city council is I said, what's the net present value of the franchise agreement? And I was told, you can't ask questions, you must make statement. But that's the very first thing. That's what we have to get to, is what's the net present value of the franchise agreement? You could say it's $1 billion out of the 4.3. But what that would mean is that the city and all the other jurisdictions that would do the municipalization would only need to finance 4.3 billion, not 3.3 billion, not 4.3. So the net present value. So the municipalization study, which must be done by impartial third parties that are expert in this and understand renewable energy and understand the transformation of the electric industry. That's who must do the municipalization study, which the City Council did a unanimous vote to do that. But the problem is this, and I'll wrap it up because I know you got to go. But it basically, boils down to.
I'm sorry, but you're not. I'm sorry, just talking. I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
You
So
have the council to
I'm making a statement more than a question here.
I'm sorry, but she's gonna be late. It's 8:37. I need to go. Run certain. Is there anybody else that's available? Nobody else is available to ask me questions. I've given you 15, 20 minutes, but you're not asking me any questions. I've given you a platform to speak, and I hear what you're saying, and I understand. I really do understand.
So
I'm gonna go. Okay? Is there anybody else that wants to speak to me? No? Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We can, let's, if you want.
He did not.
But, say.